Hello, haunted Espolo Beantown. And super milkshake? Holy cow. BB Butcher loves me. I love you too. Thank you. I like this dress too. You come, you like stream. Ooh, simple as. Banana. Banana. With the shrimp emoji. I am Jewish. I feel like my stream is lacking. And it's not good. I do not like stream lag. Bro, I've had an insane 24 hours. Like crazy. Because I just got accidentally very, very high. I was not trying to. And I was losing my fucking mind. I could not focus on anything. I'm glad you like the dress. And like, I do not remember most of what happened last night. But also, what I do remember, I have like snippets of the past 24 hours. And it feels like lots of things probably happened between those snippets. But I was talking to the person that I was with last night about all the things that happened. And what I thought was like an hour-long break between moments of time was actually only like 30 seconds. I think the camera is wobbling because I keep messing with, or I just like keep bumping my desk. So yeah, crazy. Yes, perfect Elden Ring based entertainment. It's 70 IQ because that's exactly the level of intelligence that I'm at right now. 70 IQ. Room temperature IQ. agree, Mark. You are so correct. How much would I sell my glasses? I don't know, not too much. More than what I paid for them is probably like 200. Oh, really? That's cool. Yeah, I like this dress. I sort of don't like white clothes because they stain so easily. Yeah, the last panel is, I don't know, just sort of tiring to me. I like, I don't know, I think media discussion is always difficult because if people start talking about media that you haven't seen, you can't really like jump in and discuss it. So I was struggling a little. I think just because I was like much younger than everyone else on the panel. So the media that I've consumed is different than theirs. Oh, that's terrible. That sounds brutal. I have boba tea. How incredible is that? Boba tea. Apparently, this panel's like intense blood sports. All right, I gotta very quickly read this article. Mm-hmm. All right, Tokyo Associated Press. I think that's what that stands for, right? Yeah. The assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has unearthed long suspected, little talked of links between him and a religious group that started in South Korea. That's fascinating. What I know about Shinzo Abe is that he did not help with like the Korean Japanese relationship. Police in the Japanese media have suggested the alleged attacker, Tetsuyu Yamagami, it's so small on my screen, was arrested on the spot, was furious about Abe's reported ties to the Unification Church, which was which has pursued relationships with politically conservative groups and leaders in the United States, Japan, and Europe. It's interesting. I know I'm so tiny. Okay. Many Japanese have been surprised as revelations emerged this week of the ties between the church and Japan's top leaders, which have their roots in shared anti communism efforts during the Cold War. Interesting. What is the Unification Church? The church was founded in Seoul in 1954, a year after the end of the Korean War, by the late Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the self proclaimed Messiah, who preached new interpretations of the Bible and conservative, family oriented value systems. The church championed anti communism and the unification of the Korean Peninsula, which has been split between the totalitarian North and democratic South. Best known for mass weddings where it paired off couples, often from different countries, and renewed the vows of those already married. big open places such as stadiums and gymnasiums. Whoa. Throughout his life, Moon worked to transform the church into a worldwide religious movement and expand its business and charitable activities. Moon was convicted of a tax evasion in 1982 and served a prison term in New York. Developed relationships with conservative world leaders. Interesting. Had ties with North Korea's founder, Kim Il sung. Okay, this is important. What was Abe's link to the church? Abe was known for his arch-conservative views on security and history issues and also was backed by powerful lobbies such as the Nippon Kaigi. He appeared in events organized by church affiliates, including one in September 2021. In a video shown on the big screen at the meeting of Church-related Universal Peace Federation, or UPF, Abe praised its work towards peace on the Korean Peninsula and the group's focus on family values. I feel like this is not spicy. It's very basic. Mm-hmm. Does the church have like influence in Korea now? That would be interesting to know. Like, why is this so controversial? Favorite philosopher? I don't know. Because I like lots of philosophers that are very weird. But I'm not quite willing to be like, oh, he's the best in every way. So I don't know. I don't know if I have a favorite philosopher. Right, because what is the religious group that like had a ton of influence in Korea? Oh man, also okay, sweet. Yo. Oh, I'm the only one in the lobby. Oh.
I
Well,
like
I
it.
would have a different one, but
Whoa.
but it's not working. So
It's got personality to it. You know, we can see into your life a little
right,
bit.
it has like perspective.
Exactly.
What's up, gamers? How is it going?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going
Going
so
okay.
well. Incredible.
So well, Taftage. Is it really?
Yep. Probably the
What's
best that
life?
it's ever gone in
Awesome
life.
Hell yeah.
What's life as
for
a
anyone.
up and coming? What's life as an up and coming businesswoman in 2022 like?
Amazing. The economy is doing
Fair.
so well. And
I agree.
Hell yeah. Oh, Bo Blacks, hello.
Hello, hello.
Everybody's just slowly trickling in here. Do we have everybody? Let me see here.
You guys can hear me fine, right?
We
Yeah.
can hear you. We
Sweet.
love you.
Thank you.
Wow, we actually have everybody in a call right before
Whoa.
8:10. Wow. That's amazing. It's a
Fucking,
new record.
we did it. There's only 5 of us though. If there was the full 8, there'd probably be a delay.
Well, look, I'm trying to keep this smaller than before. So we've got about 7 people in here.
Thought you were gonna put Zen on with me this time, but we had our 1v1 and I think we hashed it out pretty good.
Oh, that's good.
What did you
yeah.
argue
Well,
about?
Well, it was initially the way it was pitched to me was that they were going to expose me as a secret lefty and like
Whoa.
what real conservatism was, and then it became a conversation that I thought was more interesting, which is it Christian? Is it a Christian principle to legislate theology? Like, should we be legislating Christianity? That was a much more interesting conversation, and luckily we were able to get there pretty quick.
Where did you come down on that?
Yeah, it was a good one. Like Star, you were 100% right in a 1v1 setting. It was a great conversation.
yeah, he's
Even
great
with
for
BPF moderating.
1v1s, yeah. But
I'm gonna fuck with my mic.
yeah, for 1v1s
Yeah,
he's
it's
excellent, but just group panels
Oh,
he's
boy.
not good.
Who are you talking about?
Zen Shapiro.
Okay. I don't know.
I remember Zen Shapiro. I talked to him once.
I'm gonna grab my water real quick.
It was a good discussion. He made it. I think he made
All right.
it
How about
maybe
I feel
45
like
minutes
I
into
could
our
just move my
discussion
mic like
before he
much
brought up
closer.
incest.
Hello, hello.
Oh, really?
Is that a record? It's good.
I don't know. It could be average. It could be record speed, record slow. He always debates. I mean, I don't want to say Christian issues, but you know, his main thing is like abortion, gay rights.
Oh, I was gonna debate Sen Shapiro. I like added him and was like, "Hey, do you want to debate?" And he was like, "I'm down," and it just never happened. I asked him like when, and
Wow,
you know,
Howard
he
Zen
dodged the
Shapiro
debate.
running.
Damn.
I think because
I think they-
I'm like
Running
very
from
willing to
half-dash.
bite bullets when it comes to abortion debates.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the easiest way to get him is he's an in-house debater for the Crucible. So if you like group him in with like BPF, Paleo ChristCon on Twitter, they'll usually find a slot. I think for him, it's just he has like actual slotted debates every week on the Crucible.
Damn.
That's fun.
Yeah, they're a pretty official operation there. They had a whole fucking graphical intro. It was pretty sweet.
I've been on their thing a few times.
Aptosh, do you think what lessons should we draw from the Spartan Society?
That you should kill malformed babies. That's the correct draw from it.
Okay, okay, that's fair.
And walk around
I-
shirtless. Those are the main things to learn. You should be conservative with your language.
The other thing is like it's it's funny to imagine like obviously in history Spartans are like a pretty revered warrior class of people, but it's funny for me to think like, oh, if I went back to like ancient Sparta, I bet they're all like really short,
They're all
small
like
guys.
5'4".
You know, like,
What's wrong
the
with
average
that?
Spartan was probably
Nakano boy.
no, it's just funny to think like, oh man, like you're in like an ancient Greek battle, and I'm 6'2", and I'm probably I'm 6 inches. Like I can probably see like over the. It's like I've heard some people describe going to like Japan, like shorter societies like that, where it's like you can just see so much further in front of you if you're tall in certain places.
Because you're just above everybody.
Right.
I mean, you're kind of the equivalent in the Twitch world. Seems like everybody I talk to, all the dudes in the Twitch world are like 5'10" or 5'10" or below.
That's true.
Is that true?
You guys all have.
If you want to get that
deep
experience closer
insecurities.
to home, just go to Mexico.
Yeah.
Specifically, go to a part of Mexico where there's like a lot of
Just come
mestizos,
down to the border.
and
come
you
Yeah.
will
over.
have that experience.
I'm already right
Z's
there.
with the
So
super chat
Let's take
says
a trip
Doobie.
to El Paso.
Z's with the super chat says Doobie, my favorite malformed baby. So cute.
Wow, that's very nice
Yeah.
of you.
he's right over the
That's
pit. They tried to
nice.
kick him in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But he survived.
I've got family in Mexico, unfortunately, and I've gone down to visit a few times, like family reunions, and that's how I felt because I'm 6'4", but everybody down there is really fucking short.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I enjoy going to Mexico, but I live like
It's a
2 hour
shithole.
drive
Should
away.
never
So
ever go there.
I've been to a
it's a
few
good time for
family
me.
events with my girlfriend, and she's Mexican, and her family is just all like tiny compared to me.
yeah,
Like 7 inches taller than everybody.
I have a good time there, but it's because I'm close enough to where if I don't want to stay the night there, I don't have to. I can like go to TJ or Ensenada and then drive back.
How tall are you, Taftaj?
You get to see all the little kids at the
I'm
corner, at the border selling you
Quite
fucking
tall.
bubblegum.
A Kano boy.
You
I'm
don't want to
5'10".
dox your height. 5'10". You're 7 inches taller than your
Well, okay,
girlfriend's face.
both of my parents are 5'3". So in my family, I'm taller than like everybody, which
Damn.
we've talked about.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have. I think Taftaj is adopted for sure.
Yeah, it just doesn't add up.
My girlfriend and I
Yeah,
have
that's-
the struggle where like individually we're not crazy tall, but as a couple we're like the tallest couple because I'm only 6 foot, which is like kind of slightly above average. She's 5'10", which is pretty tall. But like when we walk around, we're like the tallest couple around because everybody usually has like the giant person and the tiny person. And I got some short kings in my circle who have some tall ass girlfriends, but none of them are both tall except for us.
I think if you're
Yeah, I
5'10"
think,
as a
if
woman, you're taller than like 98% of other women.
That's
That's
true.
pretty tall for
Billy
women.
Bo Blacks, will you be getting on camera with us?
Oh yeah, I forgot. My bad.
If
problem.
your girlfriend's family is like mostly like indigenous Mexicans, that makes sense because
Yeah.
they tend to be very short.
They're all mestizo.
Cool. Okay, so looks like we're ready. We're just about ready. So, welcome to Supernova. Welcome audience and welcome panelists. Thank you so much for joining me. Just a couple of rules about this is, this is Supernova, so semi blood sports, semi casual. And sometimes I yell. Don't take it personally. I just like to yell at people. My audience thinks it's funny. It's most of the time they think it's funny. Sometimes they think it's annoying, but most of the time they think it's that is funny. Anyways, I don't really care. Main thing is have fun and follow YouTube TOS, and we'll just jump right into it. You guys want to give intros? Bo Blacks, maybe we'll start with you.
Hello, I'm Bo Blacks. I stream and make videos on YouTube, and it's fun. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for joining, Brento.
Hi, I'm Brento. I'm BrentoBox. I'm streaming more. I'm streaming right now. I mostly go on panels to discuss politics or things of the day. And Star has invited me on, so I'm here.
Awesome, Doobie.
I'm Doobie. I run the politics server on Discord, and that's me.
Cool, Akana boy.
Hey everyone. I'm really sick right now, so I might be a little bit out of it. But hopefully that only makes for a more fun experience for the audience to see me struggle my way through each answer. But I'm a Kana boy. I do economics and politics on my YouTube, and I also stream about economics and politics on Twitch and YouTube on Thursday nights and Saturday early evenings. Looking forward to a great panel. The only thing that I would add from what Stardust told us is that you all have to be sure to follow your heart.
True, very
Touching.
true. Jabtan.
Yeah, I'm Jebtan. I'm mostly just a panel hopper. I don't stream that much, but I'm generally leaning pretty hard conservative / libertarian in most things. And when I do stream, it's usually about politics, maybe some financial advice stuff. And you can find me on Twitter, which is where I'm more active, Jebtan RIP, where I tweet a bunch of bullshit, including politics and fitness and finance stuff.
Cool. And last but not least, Taftosh.
Hello, my name is Taftaj, or April, if that's easier. I stream on Twitch and YouTube. I do politics talks, mostly just going from panel to panel. And then occasionally doing solo streams. I post sexy pictures on my main Twitter, and I've got a second Twitter where I talk only about politics. So yeah, if you search Taftaj, check out my Twitch. You can find all my links.
Awesome. and I am your host. I am not a neo-Nazi, just to reiterate, and I'm also not an. I don't think I'm an SJW. I don't. But anyways, welcome
You're
and
either one
thank
or
you
the
all.
other.
Well, they call me both. So
She's both
but
at the same time. She's just hiding her power level.
A Nazi SJW.
yeah. So welcome to the panel. First question. So I gave you guys some links, and this first link that I gave you guys was about this person who's suing Survivors Network in the UK. The question for this is it still important to have gender separated spaces? What purpose did they historically serve? Is it the right thing to do to maintain them? How does this interact with society's growing acceptance of trans people, non binary, or other non traditional gender identities? And we'll just go into intros. Who wants to go first? We'll start with Doobie.
Yeah, they're important. For things as simple as like safety, comfort, etc. And I think that gendered spaces are typically where people actually start to give a fuck about trans issues. I think most people, if you speak to them about trans issues, they're going to say, "Hey, well, no, it's their body. You know, I don't care as long as it doesn't affect me." Blah 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 blah. Right. But I think where you really get the pushback is when they start to look for inclusion in men's spaces or women's spaces as a trans person. So I think it's pretty like fundamental to the disagreement that conservatives and progressives have on the topic. So yeah.
Okay.
I can jump in next on it if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with Doobie. I think that it is important to have, gendered spaces in a lot of contexts, but I think there needs to be some nuance, So when we're talking about trans women being involved in female spaces, there are a lot of female spaces that I think it's totally fine for them to be involved in. At my church, if there's obviously very few trans women, but in the instances that trans women have been around, they've been allowed to be in the women's church groups and things like that because for all those intents and purposes, they're just being treated as a woman. But in regard to like a rape survivor group, which is what the link you sent is regarding, I think that's one of those spaces where we have to use some nuance and really think about how those spaces are constructed with safety and with the feeling of safety in mind, and the fact that someone's biologically male can make someone feel unsafe. And so I think it's okay for that space to remain gendered based on like your biological sex. The issue with this case for me is that they're suing to get the government to take action on this charity because the charity is funded by the government. I think with government, anything that you're asking them to legislate can't require too much nuance because the government is extremely poor at nuance. So I think in this case, you shouldn't be able to sue the government. If the government is choosing to fund a charity, they're choosing to fund that charity and allow that charity to perform its duties as it sees fit. And if they don't want to fund it, they don't have to. But I don't agree with the government stepping in and forcing a gendered space because that can get really messy because they're not good at things that aren't broad and sweeping.
I'll jump in on that note because I think I mostly agree with that sort of analysis where I think that gendered spaces definitely have their place and they can be very valuable, but I don't think that companies or charities have an obligation to provide them necessarily. I think if they want to provide them, they should be able to do that, and they shouldn't be forced into not providing them. But vice versa is also true. I think that if you run, a sexual assault hotline or group and you want to include trans women, I don't think you should be forced to also have a women-only space. So yeah.
Okay.
Sure, I'll go. I think these spaces are necessary, and I think a lot of the trans acceptance that the society has made progress on is based on this idea of like, what do you care how someone lives their life or what they call themselves or how is it hurting you and those types of things. And I think everyone is usually willing to be very accommodating or understanding or tolerant on those issues in those spaces, but there is a real difference between male and female, men and women. And so when I think those boundaries are crossed, then people will speak up. And then I think they meet a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance that they thought maybe they wouldn't, because it's such a live and let live type of acceptance that when you meet these real types of conflicts, I think these things are just going to keep happening more and more. But we can talk about it. So
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. So, is it important to have gender-separated spaces? I would say yes, insofar as there's a inequality or need for sort of gender-specific spaces, men and women, non-binary people, what have you. Then I don't really see the problem with it. At the same time, I guess one could also argue for sex-specific spaces as well. I guess I wouldn't necessarily see a huge issue with that. It would depend on the circumstance. I do think that I guess I disagree with the rest of the panel when it comes to, I think that if a charity or if it's a charity receiving government money for a program, or if it's a government-run program, I think that there's equity concerns, and I'm not sure it would be rightful for a government-run program to exclude someone because they're trans, although maybe there's some examples people could bring up to change my mind on that. Is it right? Is it the right thing to do to maintain them? I would say yes. Even in a perfectly equal society, I think that there's a utility of safe spaces and sort of demographic-specific spaces. Lived experiences are always going to be different, and so insofar as that's true, it's good to have these open spaces for people of like background. Yeah, in terms of how it interacts with society's growing acceptance of trans people, I mean, it's a growing pain. Obviously, there's examples of where we might say it sounds a little weird to include trans people, but I think a lot of that is based on the society that we live in, and I think in 50 or 60 years, when we're all old people, it'll be one of those things where our grandkids can't believe how excluding we were of trans people. I think that's probably going to be what happens over the course of the next several decades.
Well, a point of clarification in this circumstance.
Before
Sorry.
we get into it, I
Yeah.
think Bo Black still has to give his intro, and then we'll open it up to everybody. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I think trans women or men in all of these spaces should be treated the same way that cis women and cis men are treated. I don't really see the issue with the fact that they're like, what's the issue if there's a trans woman in a woman-only space? There's still a woman. Like, I don't get the issue. I don't really understand.
Okay. All right. Now we can open up the floor.
Yeah, the point of clarification I wanted to make for Econoboy. So the lawsuit isn't a lawsuit to get the government to provide a trans-inclusive space. It's the opposite. So the charity was
I know.
offering. Oh, okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
it just seemed.
No, I think someone mentioned the idea of, should basically government-funded entities be forced to be sort of gender equal, in the sense that you're essentially including trans people in their identified category, and that's kind of what I was responding to. But I get this.
Okay.
Essentially, as far as I understand the situation, it was a rape victim who basically felt that the government was breaking the law in not providing a female space when she was uncomfortable talking about her experiences in front of I suppose one or more trans women in the same group.
I was the person who said that they shouldn't be obligated by the government to provide either type of space, and that they should have the ability to choose. And so I think Econoboy is saying that, like, they should, if they're government funded, they should be obligated to allow trans women in the women's spaces. And I think that that's probably like too blanket of a requirement for government funded organizations.
Yeah, because I think one of the things we run the risk of, right, and this is where some people may disagree, who like a little more comprehensive government intervention than I do, but I think that it's healthy to have a distinction of government-run programs and government-funded programs. When we fund a program through the government partially, that's like private hospitals and things like that.
A lot of things are partially funded by the government.
Yeah. and we're acknowledging, we think this is run pretty well, so we're going to give it some funding to make sure that it can help the most people possible, and the United States, taxpayers don't have to pay as much for the administration. It's already being handled by sort of the private aspect of that charity or hospital or whatnot. And so in those cases, I don't think they should be forcing those entities to behave any kind of way outside a very specific context in terms of like medical care and stuff. In this context, it's just like if you don't like that they're not offering either a trans inclusive space or a female only space, I think what would be better is to share some of that government funding with an entity that does, or to have a government run program that does. But when it comes to, we're giving you some money, so we're going to try to force you to operate a certain way, I don't like that, because the whole reason they were funding them in the first place was because they were acknowledging that they did good work. And I fear that if we add too many stipulations to that government funding, you're just not going to get very much funding for, rape survivor support groups and things like that.
The only thing that I would add is that I'm not sure I don't know if there's like a significant practical difference between, hey, you're taking our money, so we expect you to operate in this way, and we're not going to give you money if you don't operate in this way. I understand there is a difference. There's like in accounting that there's an order of operations there that is different. But you kind of you end up in the same world either way, where the only places getting government money are the places that are, providing inclusive spaces for trans people, which I wouldn't, agree. I wouldn't disagree with either world. Now, I don't, I suppose I just don't see either world as significantly different, right? Because you're essentially saying the same thing.
Yeah, and I get that. So just to clarify your point of view on this, do you also agree that this charity should be forced to have a female-only space in addition to the trans-inclusive space? Or are you saying, like, as long as the trans-inclusive space is intact, that's sufficient?
No, I don't. I think that within reason, I just don't. We have to understand a couple things, right? Is that there's not a lot of trans people, right? There's not very many of them. There's certainly a minority of the population, a pretty small minority.
Doesn't feel like
right?
that on Twitch. They're everywhere. Can't escape
That's true.
them.
There's a lot of trans women in Twitch politics and online spaces. That's true. But at the same time, though, I think especially insofar as there's such a small portion of the population, I think we're probably doing more harm excluding them from government-funded entities than otherwise, right? I guess what you're saying is,
well,
doing more harm?
accountable. You can think about it the other way, where because trans women and trans people make up such a small portion of the population, they need relatively less like spaces open for them. Like if 9 out of 10, like rape survivor groups are women only, that still might be enough to like accommodate trans people, as long as there's like at least one trans inclusive group per city.
I think you could say that you don't need as many of the groups because there's so few of them. But I do think that's not really a comment on how important it is to include them, right?
Well,
And so that's kind of what my position would be. Basically, essentially, if you have a sexual assault survivor group for women, if there happens to be a trans woman who wants access to that government-funded resource, then I think there's an obligation in a moral sense. I don't know what the actual law in the UK is, but in a moral sense, there's an obligation to allow that person to be included in that space.
I mean, I think in general too, there just needs to be more spaces available also for men who are survivors of sexual assault and rape. And
True.
There's not a lot of that either. I think it'd be good if we in general saw like spaces that brought people together. And one like legitimate worry I think with like the women only groups is that they kind of allow people to like really develop and nurture a kind of fear for men. So like this woman, she's talking about how she had like a panic attack with a male person just like in her vicinity, and that's probably like something that you need to like work on to overcome. That's like not something that you can exist with in life and be successful. And so like we also got to be careful not to like encourage or nurture that kind of fear too much, and to an extent like some exposure to people of the male sex is probably good. So I think that like we do need these like female only spaces, but we shouldn't like go too far with them.
Seems like,
Yeah.
I mean, everyone interacts with people who are male and female every day. She's probably exposed to males every single day of her life. I think that one place was the place where she wanted to go and only talk to other women, females, about
Mhm.
her rape experiences. So, I mean, I don't think that exposure, like the literal place she was there to talk about her experiences, shouldn't be the exposure therapy.
I mean, if it's like a safe place though, like I think the real advantage with exposure therapy is you can engage with it in a very controlled environment where you feel very safe. And so like a place that is specifically set up to, you know, be non-traumatic to you and where people have like freedom to discuss things and feel comfortable, that's like in a way it's like the perfect place to interact with people who are male and learn that that can be okay. So yeah, I don't know, I started the discussion and I'm very much of the opinion that you need to allow people to have women's only spaces. I do think that like we can steel man the other side of the position though and say that like it is possible to take this too far, and at a certain point you do need to, you know, habituate yourself to seeing people of and being okay, you know, talking to people who are of the opposite
True.
sex.
But
Yeah.
the thing, she wants a
I kinda
female
disagree,
only
though.
space.
Yeah, correct.
She wants to be around only females, not women as we're typically talking about on Twitch or Twitter.
Yes.
Women, as it's used now, is just anyone can identify as a woman. So woman is just a label you can give yourself. She wants to be around females.
When I say women only space, I'm talking about female only space.
Well,
I'm
no one
using-
else is in the world now, and that's why there's a whole fucking problem about this.
Okay, I'll just
Has
amend what I said
anyone-
before. I mean to say female only space.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this
Said-
is. Sorry.
go
Go ahead, Iono.
No, I was just gonna add, like, I'm not sure. It feels like to some extent, Taft, as you're saying that immersion therapy to some degree is like always a good thing, right? And I don't know if that's true, and I don't know because at least the articles seem to say that she only seems to get panic attacks when she's talking about her sexual assault, with other males, right? I suppose trans women and cis men, and I don't know if it would be best practice to say like, oh yes, you ought eventually be comfortable talking about that in front of men, right? It's sort of I take it. The analogy to me that makes sense is like a war veteran with PTSD who freaks out every time fireworks go off, right? Like on one hand, you could say, you know, he should probably learn how to deal with that problem, right? He should probably learn how to interact around loud noises and fireworks and not have panic attacks. But on the other hand, it's probably not the hardest thing to avoid, and if it's traumatic for that person, and the cost of that immersion is so great, then I'm not sure it's necessarily best practice for everyone to do that. Although
I think that
like you
would
said,
be the
you're
long-term
kind of
goal though. Like eventually you do want to deal with the trauma to the point where you are able to talk about it in like lots of different spaces. That's different from saying that like you should be forced to. Like I don't
know.
think you should be forced to, but I do think that that should be the goal ultimately, is to like
I don't know if
really
that's true,
deal
though.
with it,
Like
the problem.
do you think the ultimate goal of anyone who's, because it sounds like what you're saying is the ultimate goal of anyone who's had a traumatic experience is to be able to openly talk about it with anyone. And
No, it's to minimize
That's
that
it.
traumatic experience to the point where you are able to, as like a consequence of working through the experience and talking about it. So like it's not that that's the goal, that is just like a byproduct of the goal, which is like working through the trauma to the point where you are very comfortable, you know, and not in the position to experience panic attacks.
Yeah, and
can
I
say,
think.
like,
Sorry.
You can go in. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I feel like this isn't even necessarily addressing the topic. I feel like we're talking about the best form of therapy.
Yeah, which we're
I don't even feel like we are on the topic. But
Well, I think
well,
it. I think it is
I think it's
'cause
relevant, right? Because
it's part of-
this was the reason she wanted the exclusive space, right? So
right, but
know,
I mean, I don't think
the
that's.
question
I mean,
is like,
Steve's
is
got his
that a
hand up,
justification?
and you were talking too. Sorry.
Yeah.
Chip.
Yeah, I think it is because when we're going to have to dive into specific manifestations of female only versus not female only groups when we talk about if it's right to maintain them. Because, like I said, there's nuance, but I think this does bring me back to my point that when there's this much controversy, not even controversy in a negative sense, but controversy in a sense that we don't know the answers for every mental health or other female space related issue, why we shouldn't be able to sue the government to force someone to go a certain direction with it, because we don't know. Because I think Taftaj is right from what I've handled with, I've had a panic disorder, and I think generally the end goal is to get to a point where your triggers can occur and you are able to at least bring yourself to a point of acceptance on your reaction to those triggers and live a normal life and reduce the obstacle that those triggers present. And the most effective way proven in the literature to do that is exposure therapy. But I do agree that there's going to be a stage of treatment that doesn't include exposure therapy, because at a certain point, re-triggering yourself over and over can start to set you back if you're not ready yet. So I think it is definitely important to have the female-only space for therapy. I just don't think that you should be able to sue the government to force an entity to have one. Rather, you could lean into a church body or another private group that does provide one, because I guarantee there are female-only groups in her area. It's just not that one,
I'm gonna give
And that's
Tasty a
kind of
chance
where
to
I
get
fall
Go
in
ahead.
too. Yeah.
Sure.
and then I have a question from the audience that I think might make
Well,
this
can I
spicier.
go after two? But go ahead. No,
Yeah,
I
go
want to
ahead.
get into two, but go ahead, Dewey.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering, like, what are the opinions here on like safe spaces generally for like minority groups? Because
What about
my
for majority groups? That's a
or
spicier
majority
question.
groups, you could do that too. But typically, when people make the argument for safe spaces for like different ethnic or racial groups or even religious groups, it's because there's like a shared experience that's unique to that group, right? And they want to provide these groups a place where they can talk about their experiences. They can do so freely with other people that understand their experiences, and they won't face the judgment of people who don't understand those experiences, right? So it seems like given that that's typically the argument for these kind of like safe spaces, right? It seems to me that it makes sense that given that trans women don't really have a female experience, right? They're not going to have the average woman's experience or any woman's experience, right? When I say woman, I'm talking about females.
I think it depends
It makes
on the
sense
trans
that
woman, but like
it's going to be
for
extremely
every
rare that you're going to have
trans
one that's
woman
it's going to be
who's-
extremely rare that you're going to have one that's been passing long enough to have like an actual like female's experience.
At least for like the first
Yeah.
like 5 years that you are starting to transition. It's very hard to claim any sort of female experience.
But even then, like let's say you do eventually you transition, then you eventually pass. If you had grown up as a man, you're gonna have grown up conditioned in a way that's entirely unique to the vast majority of women in the country, right? So
see
it's
this too,
that
like in
still has an
trans
impact.
You'll go to a trans group and you'll have these people who like are in their 40s and they're just beginning to transition and they just act like men in like the group and they like talk over everyone and they're like interjecting and it's like it feels like you're talking to a guy. So like this is definitely a thing. And like when people say that like there was a trans woman at this female space and like it made it very uncomfortable because they just acted male, I'm very empathetic to that because like I've been in that situation where I've been hanging out with trans women and there's one trans woman who like no faults of her own, just like the way that she was raised, it's very like male energy.
Yeah. So
Well,
so it seems like, given that's typically the argument, and it seems like there is something to that. It makes sense, I think, for women not to feel comfortable with a trans woman in the group, right? And given that, again, I think Taft has pointed out earlier that there's so few of these people in the population at all. Even if 9 out of 10 didn't allow them, the one that did would probably still be enough to accommodate, that tiny percentage of the population that's trans. So I don't know. I feel like this story is about a woman who is suing to create an all-female space, basically. But there have been stories on the other side where there are trans women who are suing to create a trans inclusive space at female shelters. There've been stories about a women's shelters being shut down because they were sued by a trans woman who wasn't allowed in because the women in that were attending the space were made uncomfortable by them. Right. So, yeah, I think it's totally reasonable for them to want to keep them a female space.
I disagree.
Why?
I think having excluding trans people from or trans women from female spaces ostracizes them. The whole point is that they want to integrate into society as, a typical woman, be treated the same as any other woman. And if we exclude them from
Do
these
you see that there's
spaces,
a cost, though, to forcing spaces to include them? Do you see that there is a cost there?
what's the cost?
That you're going to
They're
have
male.
some women who are
They're not-
uncomfortable and are
They're
unable
male.
to like get a full experience dealing with their trauma.
I've got a
trans women in
question too
space.
for Bo Blacks real quick. Do you think that it would in any way change the circumstance if the trans woman was there for a sexual assault that happened when she was a child and identified as male?
I think the experience would be that she's talking about would be very different. And
Okay.
or I don't. Well, if they're a child, I feel like if you're assaulted as a child, whether you're a man or a woman, I think the big, problem or core of that issue is that you were a child when you were assaulted, not whether you were male or female, right? That's like
reason,
that's
that's
just an
kind of the
additional
core
thing.
thing, right?
the reason why
Well,
I'm
that's
asking
just
is
another part
because
of it.
it might generally be the case, and we don't know, and this is why I don't want the government legislating it, but it might generally be the case that an entity that has a specific trans inclusive space and a specific female only space would not only be helping females the most, but would also be helping trans people more effectively. Because I
yeah.
think there are a lot of circumstances where trans people have a unique sexual assault
Yeah.
experience that wouldn't be
agree.
best
And
served
might be
by being in a female only
Yeah,
space.
and so
Cis people in the space
if
as
there's
well.
like 3 spaces where it's like cis man, cis woman, and then like
Trans inclusive.
trans inclusive. Well, maybe there'd be more because
Or there's like a
there's so many
mixed
different
group
types of
space,
trans
and then
people,
there's
right?
spaces for like
But I think that would be
together.
ideal. But as a lot of people are saying, there's not that many trans people, so there might not be enough people to fill in to make that group. So if there's only like, let's say there's like you're in like an area and there's these 3 groups, but there's only one trans person. Wouldn't it make more sense to put let's say they're a woman, the trans woman into the woman space instead of making a group for them where they can't talk to anybody else because it's not enough to fill out that group?
I don't think that's the thing is where this becomes super nuanced because we don't know if that would even be the most effective place for the trans woman to go. Someone brought up, what if it's a trans man? And that's a big deal, right? Because if a trans man is there for a sexual assault that happened when they were like a young identified woman, before they identified as a male, then their sexual assault experience is going to be very different than any male in that room.
But also, 2 cis women or 2 cis men or what have you can also have very different sexual assault experiences.
Yeah, I would say that the
the
problem
difference
is not
between
really
experiences
difference.
doesn't just come from gender, so I don't know why there's
They
so
have to
much
share
focus.
something to both have been sexual assault. There must
Well,
be some kind of
yeah.
element that they share in that. So everyone's is uniquely
I don't
different.
think the
but
problem is that like the experiences are so different. I think the problem is just that like some people feel uncomfortable because they are being like reminded of their trauma. Like men commit something
you say
like
that?
90% of violent crimes in the United States. So like when women are kind of confronted with someone who looks like their rapist or someone who could assault
Yeah.
them, that can be very damaging. And it can like
I'm
make
actually
this
curious.
space not comfortable. So I think that's the problem. But yeah.
'Cause I don't know of any like polls or studies on this, right? But I imagine that if April here walked into one of these battered women shelters, none of these women would bat an eye. I guess April looks like a woman, right? But if you had somebody who was just in the beginning of the transition or hadn't medically transitioned at all but was trans, right? So they looked very masculine. If they walked into a space like that and saying that they're a woman but looking like a man, I can imagine this is going to be very it's going to make this space very uncomfortable for the woman there.
Yeah.
So Bubba, so would you put like I'm kind of curious because I think you'd agree with that, right? So would you like?
Well,
Do-
I feel it. Okay, you
Go-
say
no,
your
go ahead.
question and I'll answer.
No, I'm just wondering if you think that because you said, hey, trans women want to be accepted as like just any other woman. But the reality is that a lot of trans people don't look like any other woman. A lot of them have not transitioned yet. Even if they have,
Yep.
maybe they did it very late in life, so they look very masculine still.
Socrates.
Right? So they're not any other woman, and they don't look like that. So, given that reality, like, how can we just say, hey, they want to be treated like any other woman? So, who cares if it makes women uncomfortable? Let them in the space.
When you're a trans person and you're just starting your transition or wherever you are in the process, you got to be very self-aware of where you are in the process. Like, if you do not pass as female but you're a trans female, that person will know that, and then they would kind of socially assume that it's probably not best to go into those spaces until they're further along
I think you'd
in
be
their
surprised.
transition.
Yeah, and this is what I'm
Well,
saying about
that
government.
should be on that. They should have that awareness, right?
But this is the thing that I'm trying
what
to
if they
say.
don't go into
Where,
the space? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
yeah, sorry. This is what I'm trying to say when I say we can't involve government in this, because it seems like we're all sort of coming to the conclusion that the best way to deal with it is like, if you pass enough to keep everybody comfortable, you should be able to be allowed in. But that there are circumstances where you don't, and you shouldn't. Do you really think that any government is going to get buy-in from like people of all sides that they can judge based on whether someone has passed that they should be included in a group?
I mean,
I don't think
agree
so.
with
Yeah, no, that's
the
an
path
insane standard.
personally.
Yeah,
So
that's why
I
I
don't
think that it should be up to the individual group that's providing the service.
I do want to throw in a question from the audience. Jangles asked a really good question. What is the reasonable limit to set for a trauma center's comfort? If a woman was assaulted by a man of a certain race, would it not be unreasonable to ban people of that race for her benefit?
That would be unreasonable.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it is at all.
I mean, it'd be reasonable
Really?
to ban men,
Yeah.
Men at all from the space.
Because what I'm
including men
saying,
of-
think about
including men of
this.
that
Though.
certain
Hold on.
race.
Think about this, guys. We all immediately picture a group of white people banning black people from the group, right? But the situation that comes in my mind is, would you guys really have a problem if a bunch of young black women who had a mutual experience of like maybe police brutality or, white perpetrators of violence against them to have a black female only space for their rape survivor group? I
No.
wouldn't have a problem
If
with
it was
that.
It's
funded by
fine
the
to
government,
discriminate
yes.
against white people.
If
We
it
all
was
know
it was a
that.
government funded agency, then yeah.
The
it was
problem
like a
is
general
discriminating
crisis center,
against
then yes.
black people, because that's bad.
Yeah,
Well,
that's my
I don't
thing.
think the question makes any sense, because if we're talking about like a women's shelter, and you're asking, hey, should we ban men of that specific race from the women's shelter because a woman was raped by a man of a certain race?
It'd be better
It
just
seems like just ban all the men.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But I think maybe the question is asking, like, is it okay to ban black women as well? Which I think is.
Well, I think the
That's
person who
way-
asked that question would probably. I'm sorry, I'm being a dude
Yeah.
and cutting off. I think the person who asked that question would probably be okay with like racial safe spaces, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's a double standard there.
That's a good question.
But I don't-
Jangles,
I
if you
don't
wanted
wanna-
to jump on, feel free to jump on.
Can I just say? I just want to say, it feels like I read the article, and I feel like I believe I heard it said here, and it's just this assumption. It's like, well, if she doesn't like it, she can go to a different crisis center or a different rape crisis center. It's fine. But no one would say that if the trans person wasn't allowed in. Well, they can go to one that includes them. People go, whoa, and they fucking throw up a red flag. But they'll say it about that woman
would.
instantly.
But I think
And
that's
so
what
it's
we're
like
saying,
that is the issue, is that like, oh, you don't like it, go find another center, and you can say it to her, but it can't be said to a trans woman.
It's
See,
because
but-
women are lower on the oppression totem pole than trans women.
You mean higher on the oppression pole? The oppression totem pole goes down.
Yeah, but I think this is why I don't like the arguments like of, oh, well, Jangles is probably okay with racial safe spaces, so he should be okay with. I don't want to assume. I think the question is good on its own merits, and I think it exposes why we should be okay with with a private institution offering specialized counseling groups to a specific group of people to be able to discriminate however they want to. Because if you're going to be okay with it, with a young black women's group keeping white men out of it, right? Or white women even out of it, then we have to also be okay with it the other way around
No,
if you're going to allow the
That's
government
not
to
how
get involved.
Progressivism works, though. Progressivism
Well, yeah, I know.
only
Progressivism
goes
doesn't
one
work.
way.
Yeah, but I
In your
not
ideal liberal
progressive.
world, where
Yeah.
there's equality of race,
Yeah, for me, I just think that as far as the government is concerned, you have to be even-handed. And so if you are proposing legislation, I would propose a government that can't intervene at all in either direction, because I think if the government is going to endorse one, they can't then not endorse the other, as long as our Constitution is worded the way that it is and we have the Equal Protection Clause.
What up, Jangles? Welcome to the stream.
Jangles, welcome.
What's up?
Hi, Jangles.
You need to
Ooh,
deliver
rocking
some.
the tank top
Jangles
after the
was
fitness
just
goals have been
spitting
reached.
fire in the fucking chat. I'm like, damn.
Jangles, you need to
we gotta
explain
fight him
Ibram
off.
X Kendi to this guy right now.
All right. I need to make it known. I'm high and drunk right now.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So you're on your toes.
Okay,
I'm on my A
Sunday.
game.
Nobody judges
Yep.
me. It's fine.
Somehow I'm better than I am when I'm sober. That's an indictment on my personality.
You're taking performance enhancing drugs.
That
For
is
debate.
literally what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you more high or drunk? Is
Yeah.
there one that's
They're
which
fighting
one's
right now.
getting you?
They're fighting
okay.
right now. We'll see who wins. It'll be a
I
wonderful
see.
battle. Anyway, what was I saying in chat?
Probably something stupid.
Probably.
You posed the question that where is the line that we draw for how far an institution can discriminate who goes into their group
Oh,
and
yeah,
who
so-
doesn't, bringing up the
so-
minority example.
Something that comes up to my mind. Like, you want to make the space comfortable, but to what extent is reinforcing comfort harmful? Like
Mhm.
what traits would you be allowed to ban? Like, legitimately, let's take it to the extreme of what the actual question is. If you like banned men from a support group or banned males, what you perceive as males, let's
Mhm.
assume like a transphobic, women are women.
Well, just
because
like
of their
male, you're
chromosomes or
talking
whatever.
about biology and
Yeah.
sex.
Yeah. Isn't that reinforcing the notion that they ought to be afraid of people with penises?
Well, I brought this up earlier, right? And I was talking about exposure therapy. And I said that, like, the strong man argument is that you need to be very careful in banning specific people because it can kind of nurture and encourage people to see their trauma as something that is like immutable and very justified. And therefore, like, that could make the trauma more intense for people.
Yeah.
So you have to be really careful not to allow that. And I think it's important that eventually you encourage women to learn to, expose themselves to very safe situations with men and then build up from there. And that'll help them feel more comfortable and help them ultimately to deal with their trauma. But I think that in order to get to that space, sometimes it's important to be in a women's only space, a female only space.
All right,
Therefore, you
take
can get to a point where you're
All right, let's
comfortable
take
an
with the exposure.
Let's take an extreme example based on my analogy. Let's say a white woman who is 100% racist. She is absolutely racist against black people. It's
Okay, yes.
indisputable. And she
Horrible.
associates all black people with this negative trait. And she is sincerely, in the bottom of her heart, very uncomfortable with any black people, one, man, envy, whatever, in the support group because she associates them with that trait.
Mhm.
Is it not unreasonable for her comfort, because she is 100% a survivor of a horrible crime
Mhm.
and deserves comfort and compassion? Is it not unreasonable to say your level of comfort is not reasonable to expect at this center?
I think that there's an answer to this, and it's actually pretty easy. And that's that it's okay for this woman to avoid black people up to a point, but her goal should be eventually overcoming that irrational fear.
We can agree that's the goal.
Yeah,
But
and so I think
about-
that the
but what
way
about
you...
what about
Mhm.
tonight, this meeting?
Well, I don't think that
There's-
she could I don't think it's reasonable to cancel or interrupt a meeting based on her specific needs. But I do think it'd be reasonable if she had to do one-on-one counseling as a start, and then that gets her to a point where she is being exposed to black men and black women.
So will we not apply that to trans women?
Yeah, I mean,
Just
this is what I'm
you
saying.
specifically as an individual
Mhm.
are very uncomfortable with quote unquote males being involved in this space. However, this woman was also sexually assaulted. We also need to make this support group for her, and hell, we need to make it for any sexual assault survivors in general.
Mhm.
So we need to, that is our primary demographic that we're trying to support, and any other variable falls secondary to that, and that becomes an individual thing.
And so
If
I
you
think
have a problem with quote unquote males, you have to work on that individual because we're focused on sexual assault survivors.
I do
But it's
think
a
that
woman's
eventually it
sexual
could
assault
be.
survivor place.
I think it could be beneficial to a lot of women to like engage with men slowly and in very safe and controlled environments to overcome like irrational biases that they might have. I
Is
think that
this
that's
environment
appropriate.
not safe and controlled? It is 100% a support group for this trauma that everyone has shared.
No, it's for
I think
women.
that the thing is that you
It
have
is
to
for
work
women.
up to
But
that.
It's the
though.
woman support group.
Yeah.
So you
And
can't
so-
just like
Sexual assault
throw,
survivors.
yeah, you can't just throw women like into it necessarily automatically and expect them to be like totally okay just because it's a controlled environment. I think you have to work up to that. And the way that you work up to that sometimes is with female only spaces.
Yeah, and controlled is
Jane
going
goes,
to be a
I-
relative term too.
Where's
So
the
if you're using control in the sense that we are trying to control her exposure to people of the sex or the race that she was assaulted by, then a space that includes those people would fundamentally not be a controlled, safe environment in that context.
Well, it could
yeah,
be.
but what's reasonable to expect from an individual? Again, going back to the race example, are you going to ban black people from your seminar?
Would you
support
ban
group?
someone
Well, I
who is
think-
transracial?
Well,
Trans
so
black?
no. So what I'm saying is, I don't think it would
Yeah,
be
that's a good
unreasonable.
face.
I don't
Sorry.
think it would be
It's a stupid
unreasonable
question.
to
That's
offer.
a great question. So
Hold
choose
on.
your question perfectly.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
I don't think it would be unreasonable to offer the space that is specifically for a certain race, a certain sex, but I also don't think it would be unreasonable to refuse her request. I don't think either way that the government should be able to lay its hand down and
You have to-
force
I
them
mean,
to
I
go
think
either
it's
way.
gonna
In
be
that no,
really
in this
niche
scenario,
is
I've
the
kind
problem.
of
Exactly, yeah.
I've
Like-
kind of dishonestly trapped you here. So the comfort of the black women that you have considered banning is less than the comfort of the white woman. that you-
Yeah,
No,
it's
because
just-
like I said, I think the individual
this is
institution has
another question. No, another question I asked is like, why is the cis woman's comforts more important than the trans?
Before we go down that
'Cause
rabbit
they're
hole, I feel,
not.
I feel like we're not
Question.
directly answering the thing. So,
Oh.
because Jengos, I imagine you'd be okay with there being like a safe space for Black people who feel like they're living in an oppressive white supremacist
No.
society. No, you're not
No.
okay with. Oh, that's interesting. Why not?
It's not interesting at all. Like you have the stereotype built up in your head.
No,
And
I think
it
most reasonable
matches.
people. I think you're a reasonable person. I think most reasonable people are okay with private, like safe spaces for minority groups.
Whether they're government
So, that's why
funded
it's
is the
present.
difference, though.
Yeah,
People
whether
can
they're
do
government
that.
funded
Whether
is
there's
a
government
little
funded is the
different.
question.
I don't
Yeah,
care
that's
if
the
the
whole.
government
That's the
funded
whole
it.
issue.
But
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, if it were a private space and they said, "Hey, we're not going to allow white people here because this is a space specifically for this ethnic group that feels like it's," and we feel like we're living in a white supremacist society, so we'd like to just be away from white people for a while and be amongst our own, whatever the fuck.
Yeah, I would
So-
absolutely be against that in principle. Like, not they're allowed to do it, but I can still, in the same way, I would be against a white only space, not legally, but like that's a shitty thing to do.
Well, there's a much better solution as well, I think. And the solution here that's better is to just have like individual counseling for this woman. If she's like so uncomfortable with black people, I think it's probably she's going to be
That's-
very unique in this. And so like
Why can't
you
she-
can't really build
Yeah,
a
all
whole
that's
group for these
great, but
people.
the conversation is like, what is a group setting? What should they do?
Yeah, and so I think it's probably
if we could atomize
Oh,
everything
God.
down to like the individual should get their own help, that's easy. Yeah,
I think
obviously.
Here,
I think
can
the
answer
group.
this, Jingles. I think if it's one person and she's demanding that like an entire group grind to a halt and change for her specific needs, I think that's probably too much of a demand on the group. And so like if you have very specific needs, that's when I think individual counseling is probably appropriate. Now, I think it's different from the trans versus cis example because I think a lot of women are going to be uncomfortable with a trans woman in the group or, you know, a male in the group. I don't think it's just going to be like one person. And so I think it's reasonable for like a whole group of people, if you know that they all have similar needs, to provide a space that doesn't have trans women or males in the group.
Are you willing to? Are you willing to? Because I'm willing to bite this bullet in my example too.
Mhm.
Are you willing to say that trans woman's like comfort and support is less important than the plurality of these women?
Yeah, that's what I would say. I would say that there's a
Okay.
trade-off here. And so like ideally, well, like if you have a mixed group, that can be beneficial. But it comes at a cost, and that there's going to be some amount of women who are unable to participate in the mixed trans woman, cis women group, and therefore they feel excluded. And then for a women's only group, there's going to be a trade-off where naturally trans women aren't able to participate in it. So I think that like we are just weighing those against each other. And I'm saying that you should be able to have women only groups because that caters to a very specific need that is very real and worth considering. And
What advice
And this is
would a
something that
female-
I was going to say, this is something you kind of hear from like men's rights activists a lot. And that there aren't many spaces for male victims of domestic violence,
Mhm.
right? But if one of those battered men had shown up to a woman's domestic abuse shelter and wanted a bed, wanted somewhere to stay and some people to talk to about his issues, I think in that circumstance too, his comfort is going to be worth less than the comfort of the woman there, right? So he'd need to go somewhere else. And I think it's a very similar situation.
I think this is kind of a simpler question than you guys are leading on, right? Is that, to me at least, the way that I would evaluate this is, what is the space for, that you're sort of segregating people into groups for, right? And is there actually like a hard segregation that's taking place here, right? So for instance, every year when and availability of alternatives is another important thing, right? So every year when there's college graduation, you see people on Twitter getting really pissed off because there's like black graduation or lavender graduation for LGBTQ people, right? But what they never mention is that this is just a special event aside from the main graduation that everyone goes to, and obviously non-black and also non-LGBTQ people aren't literally not allowed to go and interact with
what
this
service is
thing,
being
right?
provided by whatever.
Yeah,
event
what
this
service is being provided by? So like, if you, for instance, right, let's say that you lived in, I don't know, like, let's say you lived in Detroit, right? So Detroit's like a very black area, right? And they said, hey, we want to have a black only space for our government funded sexual assault counseling, right? So like a county health board or whatever has made that determination, right? The issue is that Detroit is such a black city, there'd probably be no alternatives if that was the rule for government funded sexual assault centers, right? And so the fact that there's no availability of alternatives and the fact that it's a hard exclusion means that, to me at least, there's probably a relevant moral conundrum. But insofar as there's available alternatives and it's not a space that's actually offering like a hard resource, and insofar as it's not a space that actually has hard explicit segregation, then I'm not really sure there's a huge problem here. And I think that you can probably analyze the issue of including trans women similarly in most regards.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I think we're at a similar point. I just think I have a different prescription for it, which is that they shouldn't be diving in and forcing these institutions to go either way. The institutions should have the option to do whatever they wish. And in your context, where it seems like it's a state-run program, then in state-run programs, things have to be focused a little bit more on equity. But as far as state-funded programs, I don't think necessarily we should take issue with them deciding to exclude trans people in certain groups or exclude certain races in certain groups. As long as we still feel they're doing valuable work and there's numbers to prove it, and they seem to be helping people, like helping young black women by creating a special space for them, then I don't think we should someone should be able to sue the government to force them to step in on that.
Well, but I think the difference here is that when we're, I suppose when we're, fuck, I just lost it. My fucking sick brain. I don't know. Just go to someone else. I lost it. I had a good point. Imagine I just blew him out, everybody, but I can't. I lost it in the ether.
You guys mind if we kind of transition to the next topic?
Yeah.
Transition. I get
Okay.
it.
I think. Well, look. I think we got to a nice place with this, and if we go further, then we'll not be able to move on. So
We'll be going
how
in
about this?
circles.
I mean, yeah. All right.
Okay.
I reserve
Question
the,
number 2.
I reserve the
Question
right
num-
to drop out.
If you want to,
I mean,
Jingles.
yeah.
I know.
Jingles.
I know. Typically, that I give people the topics a little bit beforehand. So
I don't want to light it up right at the end, but I guess I would say I feel like these types of things are only going to continue happening, and I think they are going to hurt like trans acceptance. I just think this is probably just something that's going to slowly chip away and create more and more problems.
Including them or excluding them?
Excluding.
Wait, what?
Oh, including in this sense, and I think it will lead to more things like what you saw with like swimming in FINA and stuff like that, where they're just like, okay, no, No, that's not going to happen.
It's this
So-
notion
Yeah.
that
Oh.
like marginalized
Are
people.
we doing?
I have
It-
a.
it- it's no, it's this notion that
Go in
marginalized
shambles.
people like
Are we-
don't deserve equal status. They have to be second class citizens. And so if we go too far in like bringing them to equality, it's bad because
No, that's not it.
people subconsciously know they don't deserve.
No,
Are we-
I
are we
think
doing
he's
equal
saying.
That's not it.
I
That's
think
not it
he's
at all.
saying. I think he's saying if there's publicized backlash to trans people being excluded, and it starts to become a big issue that a lot of women take issue with publicly, that it could hurt trans people's sort of fight for equality because it might cause more controversy with the community than it actually helps them. I think is what
I
he's
think-
suggesting.
Yeah, I think there's a social understanding that has been established, but I think it has limits, and I think those are being tested.
I have a
So,
question
to move
for-
on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
I have a
Boblax.
question for Brento Box in terms of like trans acceptance. Like you're in your like ideal world of trans acceptance. Do you think trans people should be seen equally as cis women and just like kind of merge into that group, or
Thank
do you
you. Not
think
your best
they
try.
should be recognized but respected as something third and separate from male and female, cis male and female?
I don't think that it's possible for trans women and cis women to literally mean the same thing. I think a woman is an adult female, and so I don't
But-
think it's possible. A full transition is possible, and I don't think it'll ever be accepted by society.
So you don't think it's? How about post-op? Like if they're just fully passing, they have a vagina,
Sure.
but they used to be a man. Do you think there's still something? There's still a disconnect. They can never really integrate fully into the group.
Yes, I think that will never change the relationship of male to man and woman to female. I don't
Do you
think those things will ever not be what that means.
Is that what you perceive society will turn into? Is that what you think society will
that your
react to,
personal
or is that your personal? This is what you think is right.
Yeah, I'm interested.
It's what I think is true. It's like I think that male and female is real, and I think we use the word man to refer to an adult male, and we use the word woman to refer to an adult female, and I think that's important, and I don't think that will ever not be something that people recognize.
I don't think it should
Okay,
be our goal
so-
to erode those categories either. Like
I don't
we
think
just
so. I think
need
they're
to.
important.
And
I
yeah,
think they're important categories
I think
that
a lot of people
should
draw
be like
meaning.
respected and maintained, not eroded.
99.9%
Yeah.
of your interactions with
What were you
males
saying,
or
Taptosh?
females.
Oh, I don't think that we should try to be eroding those categories of male and female. And so, like, the idea that, like, we would want trans women and cis women to be necessarily the same category with no distinction, I think is not necessarily something that's desirable. Like, let's say it, like, honestly, is that these are people with different life experiences and different needs and different desires, and they are separate
Yeah.
groups, and it makes sense
Yeah.
to separate them linguistically.
To be clear, I don't advocate for eroding the like label transgender either. I just think it's like a subcategory. Like you're a woman and then subcategory like trans woman or subcategory cis woman, but the umbrella of woman you're still like under that, right? That's kind of how I
Mhm.
see it.
Mhm.
If that makes sense. I don't know if you agree or not,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I think that does make sense. And I think it's good to like, make that clear, because I think people do worry about like you're trying to like erode the categories or make sure that there's no distinction. And that's not your goal. Like progressives don't need to do that to bring, good outcomes for trans people.
Okay. So,
Yeah, but-
oh, sorry.
yeah, I do ultimately think like if we're talking about let's say a trans woman who's fully transitioned, like presents as female, is post-op and everything, like obviously their life experiences are going to be different, and I think the fact that they're trans is still important to their identity. But if we're talking about like in the moment, like them being included in groups or them being treated differently or whatever, I really don't see like that. Like where is really the difference between, besides like past experience, where's the difference like in the immediate present to fully presenting, fully done transitioning male to female versus a cis woman? That's what I don't get.
I mean, the
with
thing
what
is that it's
Redbox
going to
is saying.
vary from like individual to individual. So like we can't really ever say that like, well, this trans woman is going to have like this temperament, definitely, and it's going to be like a masculine temperament. So like I don't know if we can make generalizations quite so strongly as far as like this is the absolute difference in every case between a cis woman and a trans woman and their experiences. But I'd say in general, trans women are going to be more masculine as far as personality and experience and socialization. And there are going to be some trans women who are like very much on the masculine side of things. And that will
Yeah.
pose a problem
I
in some
feel-
circumstances.
I feel like those differences though are like on a personal to personal basis. Like there could be a cis man who is more feminine or a cis woman who is more masculine or whatever. Being masculine or feminine is generally on an individual basis. Like just because they are trans, I'm not going to assume that they're going to be more masculine than a cis woman, even if that's probably like maybe the case in that particular person. I'm going to judge them based on them as an individual, because there could be male to female who was, when they were a male they were very feminine, so when they transitioned they ended up being a feminine
Woman.
trans person.
Yeah, and like
trans woman. So
on the other side of this, men commit the vast majority of violent crimes in the United States and in every country, but that doesn't mean that like I go up to men and just like assume that they're criminals.
yeah,
Because that's not how that works, right? Like it is only a tiny percentage of men who are actually engaging in violent crime, and every individual is not their group, and so you can't extrapolate from like group averages how individuals are going to be. You have to take every individual as they are.
exactly.
But I do think that like it is reasonable for women to in general be like a little bit cautious around men, because men do commit violent assaults, and so just as like a safety precaution, like you have to tell women, yeah, you have to be careful around men. That's just, unfortunately, that's how the world works, and
Yeah.
it's dangerous, so you got to be careful.
Yeah, but my question in general was more like to Brentobot, because he said there'll always be like the clear distinction between you're trans or you're cis, but like
Right.
my question was, if you're like a fully transitioned woman and then
Mhm.
there's a cis woman, like what would be like the major difference between those two, to the point where we would have to point out that other person's trans, like it's
Well,
important.
in,
Yeah, I would
in
have to
any
ask.
in any given social situation, you would just be courteous and treat people that way. But life is not just like a social situation. There's like real implications to biology, and you could never just forget that the word woman means female, because then we would just come up with another
All right.
word to refer to adult females, and
All right,
then that would be the thing people want to transition to.
Here's a
So-
question, and there's a correct answer. Are trans women a representative sample of males in any category? There is a correct answer to this.
Yes,
No,
The
the
no,
answer
well,
is
you are
no.
incorrect. Sorry.
trans
Are
women
incorrect.
represent males in any category.
They're
Yeah,
not
the
representative
answer is
They're
of
no.
males.
You are very
No.
incorrect.
So
Trans women are very different
you-
demographically.
you-
no.
you don't think that?
I
Well,
don't-
You just
it's-
said
it doesn't
any
matter what I
category. You
think,
didn't
I
say
have researched
demographically. You didn't say
stuff.
demographically. You said any category.
Any category,
Well,
yeah, and I've
Any
researched
category,
that.
not demographic. Like,
Demographics
are you
are
saying?
categories.
Wait, so are you saying that there is no overlap between trans women and males?
Maybe
I
like
didn't say-
height would be
Overlap?
like one.
Overlap,
one
Like,
category.
yeah,
like
there's
you
overlap
said
between
they're
any
not.
two
You said
categories
they're
of
not in
population.
any category.
Yeah, a representative sample means they are statistically
The same
indistinguishable
as
from that
men,
category.
yeah.
There's overlap between any two categories. So yeah, there's going to be overlap, but are they statistically the same? And the answer is no in any category. That
I mean,
you
like
can
for
pull
some,
up.
they're going to be pretty similar. Like height, you're probably going to have
In
a lot of
yeah.
overlap.
Yeah,
But-
high, but in the important
like,
social
crime,
categories that we're
no.
talking for like crime,
Yeah.
no. For sexual
So you're
assault
you're
no.
talking about social statistics. You're not talking about
I'm
just
talking
being male.
He's talking about every
No, yeah,
category.
you're right. I'm talking about statistics and the
No, you're
things that
social
matter.
statistics. You're saying you're
Social
asking if they have
statistics like
overlap.
crime.
I think there's a
I
disconnect.
don't
I think there's a
even know if you're fucking
miscommunication.
like. Well, yeah,
So-
there is. I don't know what even. it's
Because
like,
I think what
like, how
I
can
think
you?
what Brento was interpreting was he was interpreting like, is it
Do they
true?
have dicks? Yeah.
Is it
Yes.
true that some males are trans women? I think
That-
that's what he was
Yeah,
asking.
I think that's the
I
like
thought he-
language,
definition
yeah,
of it.
and that was and when I said representative
said-
samples,
yeah.
do you think that I meant like chromosomes
I meant you said in any category.
in any category?
So
All right,
do they
yeah,
do they
yeah,
share
they-
anything in any
yeah,
category?
they
I
might
mean,
have the
that-
same chromosomes.
answer your question honestly. I'm
In
not trying
terms
to
of-
get you.
Yeah,
in
but
the
in terms
vast
of like
majority
behaviors,
of categories, they're not representative. And it's because like if you were to take a group of men from like, I don't know, some like small town in America, they would not be representative of men in every category, or probably in most
Of
categories,
course.
because they're going to be unique. And so, like, I
Well,
think that's
yeah.
all that Jingles is saying, is that, like, if you were to take a group of trans women and compare their statistics in, like, most categories, it's not going to be representative of men.
Okay.
Is that
So
fair?
I think this might be a good point for us to move forward.
Yeah.
So I want to read
Do
a
it.
couple of super chats before we move forward. Zonia says, "Why is there only one representative trans girl on this panel with this topic?" Oh, who left? Oh, Jangles left. Oh, okay. Maybe I should take to Twitter and accuse Stardust of running a phobic panel. Zonia D and Zodia D sus. I think those are her emotes. Sideshow Bob says, Bo Blacks, more like Bo Facts. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Testicle Johnson says, Wick won this round of the debate. Wick isn't even here. What are you
Dude,
talking
Wick
about?
fucking
Always
popped
wins.
off.
Crazy. Good job, Wick.
Okay, so question number 2. And guys, remember you can submit super chats between at any time, but I will read them between the topics. Question number 2. The conservative movement in the U.S. has succeeded in its 50-year campaign to overturn Roe v. Wade. These same groups are now attempting to block ads for reproductive services online. Is it reasonable to undermine a state's legal process with this kind of increased awareness? Is it reasonable for one side to now forbid campaigning against their pet issue? Who wants to go first?
I can.
And also, I linked
matter.
a relating article about how abortion organizations or anti-abortion organizations are moving to block online ads for reproductive services. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that it should be treated as any other thing. You know, ad companies have to suppress certain ads depending on the state, generally, that they're advertising to. So, for example, online ads are a little tougher. For example, you're going to see billboards for like AR15.com in Utah. You're not going to see those in California. So I think generally, as long as they're fighting along the same rule set as anything else, like with tobacco ads and gun ads and things where the laws vary in different states as to how you can advertise things, I don't think it's a problem. In terms of campaign ads, I don't think they can touch those as far as, a campaigner trying to say, we're going to try to expand abortion rights. That's not advertising abortion services, so I don't think that could fall under it legitimately. So anyone fighting against that is wrong. But in terms of suppressing abortion ads in states where abortion is illegal, as long as they're using the same, mechanics of government that they do for guns and the other things, I don't think it should be a problem.
Okay.
And yeah, I think both are reasonable, unfortunately. Given that these people believe that, I mean, it doesn't need to be specifically this issue, but with this issue in specific. And one side thinks that they're killing babies, and the other thinks that they're like enslaving women. I think it's reasonable for both sides to try to suppress or advertise like messages that help their goal, right? To either like save women or save babies. So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. I would just say that I don't I don't really think it's the most reasonable thing, and it seems, I mean, it doesn't seem very practical. I guess it's also a matter of if you think things like, abortion pills should be illegal or not. And I feel like that's a pretty tough one. Now, this is a state which makes it a little bit more interesting. This is, I believe, a state that allows an exception for where it is deemed that the pregnancy can risk the life of the mother. The issue with that standard is nobody really knows what that means, right? Because there are news stories coming out where that's the standard, but it seems like doctors they're just not sure when they're allowed to perform abortions or not. And there's a lot of pretty high transition costs in that regard. And there's a lot of, pregnant people that get lost along the way. And I think there's pretty serious free speech implications here, right? I mean, I just don't, if something is federally legal, which as far as I'm aware, the abortion pill is federally legal, I don't know how a state could reasonably restrict someone's right to advertise access to that resource. I mean, it would be like it would be like restricting someone's right to talk about a tax exemption, right? I mean, I'm just not sure that I don't know if there's room for states to do something like that and curtail free speech in that way. Private companies can do whatever they want with regards to managing their platform. If Facebook feels like a state is going to enact something like that or punish them if they don't do something, I mean, ultimately that's up to them. You can just agree or disagree, but in terms of by policy allowing politicians to say, you're not allowed to advertise something that's perfectly legal, that's where I feel like there's probably some big problems there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
I
just
mean,
say I agree with that. I think that if it's perfectly legal, then you should be able to advertise for it if you're willing to pay for it. Wouldn't they have to have some kind of legal grounds to restrict it? I believe, unless that's the controversy is that they don't and they're attempting to. So that's it.
yeah, I'll just
Dude.
jump in as well and say that, like, I think the method for trying to restrict this kind of advertisement or just like discussion of the existence it's by treating abortion like organized crime, which I think is probably too extreme, and is probably encroaching in on First Amendment rights. So I think that, like, if you are banning people from advertising like abortion services within a state that doesn't allow abortion, I think that's probably appropriate. But if you're banning people from just like putting out information regarding abortion, or other ways of ending a pregnancy, I think that that's probably moving too far. It's just too broad. Like, I think what Econo Boy is saying, that you have things that are federally legal, but that would become illegal to talk about within this kind of sweeping legislation. So the way that you go about regulating advertisement does need to be a lot more narrowly focused. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, who's left to go?
If we're allowed, or if
I guess
people are
me.
allowed to put like fucking free iPhone, click now, or like click on this game and fucking to come or whatever, all those fucking stupid ads, then why can't we advertise abortion clinics? Like, how are we like?
All right. So I'm of two minds about this, because on one hand, I actually do on the free speech scale, I'm very firmly planted on the you should be legally allowed to say whatever you want, even if it includes Nazi shit. Like, legally, like, that's where I think it ought to be. And so on one hand, I'm thinking, yeah, obviously you should be allowed to like encourage any sort of abortion ads that you want. And I'll call them abortion ads, not reproductive ads. Let's be honest about it. But at the same time, like, wait, what happens if a lot of alt-right ads, like all the ads for PragerU and America First and all that stuff, like, what would I want to be the policy that could be consistent with what I think, while at the same time preventing the things I don't want to happen? And then I think you have more leeway. You allow legally you allow basically everything, and as a TOS you allow a lot of things. And you gotta let cancel culture take its course. Cancel culture has some good things. If enough people like reach out about it, that might be like the only. It's not a good metric, but it's also the best one. It's horrible. And it's the best one we have. So
I mean, the thing is that, like, you're not allowed to advertise like conspiracy to murder, or like you're not allowed to advertise like things that are active
yes,
crimes, which I think is very reasonable. But like, the problem with this kind of legislation is that it would ban talking about things that are not illegal.
Well, I think there's a line there, because if people we're putting out like ads like to let people know that the most effective way to commit suicide, I think you'd probably have people say, hey, this kind of shit shouldn't be on our platform or on the internet, right? We should get this stuff off. But that's not illegal, right?
and
Yeah, it shouldn't
even
be
legality
illegal.
is a tough issue, because what if
Yeah.
you are trying to advocate for something to be legal that is not currently legal, like
Right,
weed?
yeah.
Like, how would you advocate for the legalization of
Well,
marijuana
those
if
ads are
it's illegal?
protected from most advertising guidelines because those are campaign ads, so those are different.
Yeah.
I will say though, I'm reading the actual legislation that this crackhead committee drafted up, as far as we can have a conversation about generally making certain abortion ads illegal, this piece of legislation is dog shit. They're literally saying like you can't talk about it at all.
It's
That is
very far-reaching. Yeah.
yeah, that's retarded. That this specific example is dumb and no state should adopt it.
Do you think the
'cause
goal
it's-
is to like place a benchmark so that the middle ground is shifted?
Probably.
What do you mean by
I mean, it's
that?
a national right to life committee. I think he's saying like introduce something so extreme that it survives in a way that they can be satisfied with after a bunch of amendments and concessions
It's like
are
shifting
It's like a
the Overton
bargaining
window, basically.
position,
made.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This
But
is a
you're-
retarded bargaining position because it's like the Green New Deal, like the way it was written initially. It's like it was just a hard no. This is the same thing. It's like this doesn't even give us a starting point because it's so obviously anti-First Amendment. It's sort of like you can't talk about it. You can't talk about even abortion services that are legal in the state. Under this, an abortion clinic just putting up a billboard that says, in this state, abortions are legal up to 8 weeks could still be considered illegal. So that is ridiculous.
Well, it's weird because in some states, like abortion is considered like a form of murder, right? Like so, if they're considering this a form of murder, I think I don't agree with them, right? Like I'm more pro-abortion than I think most people, but I think it's reasonable for them to say, hey, we don't want pro-murder ads in our state. We don't want people saying, hey, if you go to this other state, then you can murder your baby. So I think if you look at it from their perspective, it's reasonable for them to be this extreme, but you know, it's kind of fucked.
I
mean,
can
I
see
don't
that
think
in
it
the
should
context.
I think you
Sorry.
should legally be able to just like give information. And if the information is literally just that like this state allows abortion or this state doesn't allow abortion, that's the kind of thing that's important to be like protected under the First Amendment.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing is like when you get down into the nitty-gritty of it, what does this legislation consider an ad, right? Because if I'm in Louisiana or Missouri, the two that like have considered bills that make like abortion anything past fertilization being terminated, like if I'm in that state and I'm Googling what states are abortions legal, and there's a promoted article, is that considered an ad? Because that's kind of fucked because it's just an article that has been promoted so that it shows up on the top of Google. But that is technically a Google ad. That is, you would have to buy that through
Yeah.
Google Ads. So
Or
it's
like, what about national platforms, right? Like, if I write an article in New York on the Huffington Post about
Mhm.
alternatives that people have available to them in states where abortion is illegal, is it like full on Chinese government in Texas where like they ban people from reading that article? I mean,
Yeah, they're
it's a
not
genuine
allowed to
question
know the
because-
information, which I
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like some Vladimir Putin shit, honestly, right? I mean,
Hey,
that's arguably the implication of that. So
Brento, I
Yo.
think you're like very against abortion, right? Like if you
No, I'm not very against abortion.
you're
Just a little
mildly
bit
against
against
abortion.
Scale
I think
scale of
it's-
1 to 10.
I don't think it's. I don't think it is. I don't think it is nothing, and I don't think it is just removing a clump of cells. I don't think that. But I do think that it's necessary in some cases, and just honestly, I just imagine that if anyone I knew or cared about was like raped, and they said I'm aborting the baby, I'd be like, yeah, I get it.
Mhm.
So I can't say I'm against it because I would just I would say yeah.
I mean, there's also commerce. I mean, I would say to some extent there's some commerce implications here as well, where you see, I want to say it was proposed in Texas, the idea of like punishing people who went to legal states in order
Yeah.
to access abortion services. And it's like, okay, well, at this point, it's almost like the union is breaking up. Like one of the foundations of America is it's like the EU, right?
It's
It's
the
the free
federalist
flow.
system.
Yeah. I mean, it's the free flow of people and capital across state lines. And if we allow states to say that certain states can censor advertising for legally agreed upon federal issues or restrict the movement of people, well, we don't really have one country at that point. We really do have almost like a Confederate style, 10th Amendment dream world where, basically states can do whatever they want in terms of governing the people within their borders, which is, I mean, I'm just, there's a lot of scary legislation being proposed where the implications are quite questionable.
Yeah, I'm very
Yeah.
empathetic to this level of analysis because I am a big fan of states with individual governments and their ability to self legislate. But I think that system only works if there are certain guards in place that make sure that people are able to move freely between states and to have full information in choosing where they want to live. And
Yeah.
it's really that's really the key to the puzzle here. Because if you don't have that, then you allow states to basically like shut people in, lock them in. And the benefit of having a variety of states with different governments within the country is really lost. The benefit that is allowing people to choose communities which really represent themselves and their values and where they can be most fulfilled. That's really the advantage. And in order for that advantage to be manifest, you need to have the free flow of information in people. So I think it's really scary when you start seeing laws that like try to restrict that kind of movement. Because, like Akana Boy's saying, it really is starting to put cracks into the entire premise of the United States Union.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Doobie in the sense that when you look at part of this legislation, what they say they're targeting is like sanctuary counties within states with hardcore abortion laws, saying with prosecutors that are basically going to say, I don't care if it's illegal. We're not going to actually prosecute anybody who performs an abortion in this county, and they're saying they want to keep those counties from basically being able to advertise, hey, come over to blank county and we're going to rip that baby out for you, and we're not going to prosecute you or the doctor for doing so. And I understand that, right? Banning the advertising of illegal activity, I totally understand.
Or of like specific abortion clinics.
Yeah, and that is already law. I'm pretty certain federally you can't advertise illegal activity. So it seems like they would either need a bill that's way better written than this one, because this really isn't even written like a legitimate piece of legislation, or they need to just leave it at it is already illegal to advertise illegal activity. So if these counties are saying, come here, we won't prosecute you for abortion, then I think those counties should already be liable civilly and then maybe guilty criminally of some sort of crime. I'm just not sure how that legislation is written.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's
if you live in I was just gonna say, if you live in a state where you devolve powers to counties, right, and like your county DA has the power to not to prosecute for certain crimes. If you don't like that, you have to change that law, right? But trying to shun away free speech because you don't want to say conservatives don't want to say I'm against local control, even though every party is against local control if it serves their policy interests. In exchange for punishing people for enacting a pretty reasonable right to free speech or free movement, I just that's where look, I mean, if you've got a problem with like the fucking DA of Des Moines, Iowa, saying he's not going to punish people for getting abortions, well, take that power away from him, right? But don't try and limit someone's ability to advertise or speak on their powers and services they're offering to people. That seems crazy.
Yeah, it's just tough sometimes, man, because I can empathize coming from a state like California, where like near me is obviously LA, right? And they threw out a shitty DA for being a shitty DA and not prosecuting things that they should have prosecuted. And then what they got as their replacement was a guy who got booted out of San Francisco for doing the exact same thing, who is now the DA of LA and is continuing to not prosecute anything. So I can understand people's concern, but we need better legislation than this.
Yeah, I'm actually so the reason I asked Brento if he's like very anti-abortion, right? It's because I'm curious as to like I can see an argument for it, right? Because let's say there's a state where the age of consent was like 10 or something, right? And they wanted to boost tourism, so they started getting ads in your state to say, hey, come over here, and the age of consent is 10. Right. I feel like I feel like it'd be reasonable for people to say, "Hey, we don't want those ads in our state." Advertising.
Exactly.
And
So
I think
that's how it works within countries too, right?
Guys, if I can just butt in real quick, Bo Blex has to dip.
I have
so,
to go.
But
it was fun talking.
Bo Blex, thank you for joining us. Guys, go check out Bo Blex. Okay?
Yeah. Everyone have a good day. See you later.
Yeah, man.
Bye,
Yeah.
Goodbye. So yeah, I think that's the seriousness with which conservatives look at this issue, right? It's like literally murder of a baby. So I can understand why they'd go this far to try to prevent it. And I wonder, like, if it were the age of consent thing that I just gave, right? Would you guys be in favor of the state restricting another state's ability, or even another county's ability, to advertise their lower age of consent laws, right, to attract tourism?
I mean, if anything, I think it could be like an anti-advertisement. Like, I think people would want to know that the age of consent is 10 or whatever in that state, so they can avoid bringing their children to the state. So I think that, like, to an extent, like, you just need to allow people to express information. But, like, I think that I don't think that you should be able to, like, in general, I think it'd be inappropriate to lower the age of consent to 10. And so I think
I mean,
that you should probably just,
advertising
like, not allow that in
advertising
the beginning.
advertising having sex with minors is illegal, right?
Right,
So the federal
exactly.
age of consent is
Right.
the federal age
Hold
of
on,
consent
but
is
So
legal
sort of
where?
right?
we have to imagine a scenario in which it is legal to lower the age of consent to 10. And in that situation, is it okay for a state to advertise that?
My issue with
first
that
instinct.
analogy, though, is I can see in this legislation, though the legislation doesn't do a good job of actually doing that, what they say their target is counties that haven't actually changed any law. They are just saying they're not going to enforce the state law. So I think the better analogy would be a county saying, age of consent is still 16 or 18 or whatever, but if they're 14, we'll turn a blind eye. That I definitely think should be illegal.
Yeah,
But my
that
issue
shouldn't
is,
be
I think it already
illegal.
is. Like
Right.
Conoboy was
Yeah, I
saying.
think so
Yeah.
too.
Also, the YouTube streamer in Twitch Politics, Twitter just called me an Omnicon, and I think that's my new title. I like that one.
Omnicon.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
you're an Omnilib, Taftaj, and I'm an
What?
Omnicon,
I'm an
according to
Omnilib.
I
the.
don't think they
Wait,
called
but-
you an omni-lib. I think they called her a...
Oh, Econoboy was Omnilib. You're right. Yeah,
Mm.
Taff is Libertarian Right Light, new and safe for work Twitter. Oh,
Wait,
because
so-
he put your Twitter too on there.
So separate from your positions on abortion, like I don't know all of your positions, but but
Sure,
separate from that, whatever that position is, if you'd be in favor of restricting the advertisements in the case of the someone advertising that they're not enforcing age of consent laws, what reason would there be to allow it in the case of somebody advertising that they're not going to be enforcing abortion laws?
Right. So in the
I don't
same
think they
way,
should be able to.
If it's illegal, right, is the problem. So you can't, like, advertise
Yeah.
an illegal service
Mhm.
already. And
But
we're
it's not
saying
an
that,
illegal service, right? So they're just saying, hey, we're not going to enforce these laws that are on the books.
I think that is
yeah,
kind
that
of
is
saying.
illegal. So, like,
yeah, I
if
think
you're
so.
if you're advertising, like, a specific abortion clinic, well, that's, like, the problem. If you're saying that, like, you can break the law here and we're not going to enforce it, like, it is okay to come here and not follow the laws. I think we're saying that that's inappropriate advertising.
Okay,
Yeah, right.
so-
Because
so-
California, for example, our politicians can say, right, California is a sanctuary state, and blah, blah, blah. They can say that in their speeches, but California, I don't believe, can put out ads in other states saying, come to California, where we are not going to enforce federal immigration law. I'm pretty sure they're not allowed to do that. But free speech does protect the politician's ability to say, we are a sanctuary state and we don't believe these laws are constitutional and whatnot.
yeah, it's really cringe, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and that's frustrating for me because I do, like I said, in that context,
hate
I
brown people.
don't think they should. Yeah, sure.
I'm
Just some vicious
Um,
racism.
I'm a California too, actually. Yeah, I
No, yeah.
understand. Yeah.
But like, because my thing is, I am very pro-immigration, and I want a better path to citizenship. But while there is not one, having California be a sanctuary state where they're just refusing to enforce a lot of common sense border controls and things like that, all it does is fuck over your local communities because there's not a lot of help for the people that you allow over because federally it's illegal for them to have come. But you're telling them they should come in anyway. And so I think that the First Amendment does protect the politicians, but I'm very glad that they're not allowed to go to other states and advertise, hey, come here. We're not going to we're not going to kick you out for not having a
We're
green card
actively
like that.
breaking the law, yeah.
Yeah, and
We're not
that's where
enforcing the law.
and it compounds issues like in LA where you also have a DA that's just trying to catch and release everybody and basically LA trying to implement the no cash bail, even though Californians voted that they wanted to bring cash bail back. Like it all this stuff sort of adds up. So that's why I agree that they shouldn't be able to advertise abortion in states where it's illegal, but I just think it's already illegal for them to do that, and I don't think you need to add another law, because adding legislation, all it does is open up the possibility for abuse.
Yeah, but
Yeah, and the
do you
problem with
think
this legislation specific is just how broad it is as far as like restricting information, where it goes
Yeah.
beyond just like blocking, advertising actively illegal services, but also discussing anything tangentially related to it.
Mm-hmm.
okay, but do you agree with that? It should be illegal. I know that we're saying that it is currently illegal to do that, but should it be?
Yeah,
Yeah.
to not allow people to
Okay.
advertise like immediate illegal action.
Yeah, 100%. Econo
Okay.
boy.
Where I think it would be legitimate to like have a campaign where you're like, I think we should change the law, but that's not like advertising immediate. You're not encouraging people to actively break the law in
Right.
that campaign.
Yeah.
You're just saying that we should change it, and that's an important distinction as well.
I also don't even know if I don't know if you're technically. I don't know if necessarily you're advocating for people to even break the law, right? I mean, like if you tell people, like for instance, right? If let's say that abortion, in states where abortion is illegal, save for fleeting circumstances, and you tell someone, hey, you can get an abortion in this state. I don't,
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know
okay.
if I don't know if we would reasonably say that that's like, oh, you're advocating for someone to go break the law,
Because
right?
it wouldn't be breaking the law, right? If they went to that other state where it was legal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be breaking the law, and also it's not, you're just being descriptive, right? If you're
Yeah.
especially in regards to just descriptively telling people this is what you can do in other areas. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of like Texas. I think pot is a little bit different because technically it's still federally legal, but I think the
Mhm.
feds are pretty hands off in that regard. So I think it's pretty analogous, right? It'd be the equivalent of prosecuting people in Texas for going on trips to Colorado and smoking weed, or telling just simply a politician saying, weed's legal in Colorado, guys.
Mhm.
I mean, that doesn't
Yeah,
seem
and
like, I don't know, it's huge
that's where
overreach.
that's where the line I think is. Yeah, if it's a state where that it is legal, like they are just advertising that it is legal in another area, I don't think that should be. And that's the issue with this particular legislation, is it is the Green New Deal of abortion advertising legislation. It's just trying to go overkill. And I think that you gave the perfect analogy. Like, I don't have a problem with California advertising to other states, like, hey, weed is legal here, but I do have a problem with them going and saying we are not abiding by like the actual law of the land over here. We're not going to prosecute or cooperate with authorities. That's where I'm like, okay, now they shouldn't be able to advertise that.
Sounds like we've come to
Yeah.
kind of a bit of a consensus here.
Natural
Whoop, whoop.
stopping point. Chat. Remember, you can super chat, and I will read your questions and comments between the topics. For topic number 3. Topic number 3 is related to Shinzo Abe's assassination. Shinzo Abe's assassin appears to have been motivated by Abe's religious affiliations. Should we hold prominent individuals to be responsible for movements they are a part of? If not, why should they be allowed to publicly support movements while being insulated from consequences? If
Bud,
so,
1, 2,
what
3. That's a
responsibility
great
do they
point
have
you're
to
making in
ensure
chat
their
about
affiliated
the
organizations are not
Brandenburg
harming
test.
people?
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Can I ask a question? Well, other people have their statements. I'll ask a question afterwards.
Courtney
Sure.
just submitted a membership to say that she's 10 years old. I'm assuming
is.
that's metaphorically so.
I think
Yeah,
the
just
answer is
auto-
like obviously yes.
Yeah,
right?
like, of
I think she's trying to
course,
pull
if it's
Destiny in the
relevant.
chat.
Oh God. And I think the answer is obviously yes. I think that if I mean we kind of saw this already in the United States with Obama and was it Reverend Wright? where he attended that church at some point, and videos came out of Reverend Wright saying that America's chickens came home to roost with 9/11, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Yeah, I think if a politician has anything in their life that they've devoted, kind of staked their claim by, or devoted a significant amount of energy to, or movement, whether religious or philosophical, that they say they're a part of. Yeah, I think that's absolutely like fair game for any kind of criticism.
I guess what I would say is that obviously I think the answer is you can, right? So I think you can pretty reasonably hold people accountable for the groups that they're a part of, whether they be religious or not. And however, that doesn't mean that holding them accountable is assassinating them. I'm
Yes,
sure we'd all
shooting
agree with
them.
that.
Mhm.
Like there's a degree of accountability that you can, especially in a democratic society, utilize and
There's a legal
or enact.
process for these things.
Yeah. I don't think Shinzo Abe was without a pretty. I don't think he was without robust criticism for his associations and for his record in government. So, so it just depends on the organization, right? And it also depends on how you're holding them accountable, right? Because, like I would say that, holding like an individual Muslim accountable for a terrorist attack that happened across the world doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? But if you're like an active member of say like an extremist wing of the Catholic Church that's advocating for banning, birth control and saying gay homosexuality should be criminalized and stuff like that. You can say until you're blue in the face, oh, I don't believe that stuff. But if you're going there every Sunday and hearing those sermons, then I'm sure that I'll personally judge you for that. So
The cam actually
Yeah,
is on for the
and
panel.
one
It
of
just
my
doesn't show
things
for
with
me,
this,
'cause I
what
don't want my
brought
face
me
twice.
to the comparison I'm making is when they said that the reason the guy killed him was not because of just what the church advocated for, but because the church got his mom to like donate so much money that their family went bankrupt. And so the connection I made there was with the Church of Scientology, and I totally agree. Would not shoot a politician because they're part of the Church of Scientology, but if there was a publicly Scientologist politician, they could have every policy prescription that I agree with, and I would never vote for them because I do think like the Church of Scientology is just a scam. It's a front. It's a money laundering scheme, and they do illegal shit and send PI and like really do fucked up shit to people. So yeah, I think you can absolutely hold them accountable for what they claim is a church that they worship at, but the line falls far short of shooting them for it.
I think
Yes.
holding
Can
politicians
I guess my
accountable-
question was, I didn't read it in the article. I don't remember seeing it. I didn't read all the way. How involved with the church is he? Like, I didn't know he was I never heard he was part of this. I never knew too much about him ultimately, but was he deeply involved in the church? It sounds like it was a Korean church.
I mean, honestly, I feel like the actual issue of Shinzo Abe's relationship with his church is it's just an example. It's kind of tangential to the broader issue of like how do you hold people accountable for movements that they support? At least,
Yeah.
that's my thought.
It seems like he voiced support for it. He had been at events for like accessory groups that were run by the church,
Yeah,
and he
nobody on
had
this
publicly
panel
praised the
knows.
church. In many cases, it doesn't look like I don't know if it was actually a church that he supported. But again, I would totally understand if there was Biden or Trump or whoever
that with the pet.
were spewing shit about how much they loved the Church of Scientology. I don't care if they're not actually a part of it. I would not vote for them just on those grounds.
I mean, holding politicians accountable for the movements they're involved in is like kind of the point of having
Yeah.
politicians. Like,
Right.
you
Exactly.
need to hold them accountable. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, so that's the connection I make is I think of it as a Church of Scientology, and I'm like, yes, anybody who touches that shit pile is stinky to me, but not going to shoot them for it.
Well, it sounds like we agree.
Yeah.
Great
Hey,
topic
go.
started.
I have
We've
a
heard-
question.
Cool.
I
New
have a
topic.
Lots of
Perfect.
debate.
Go ahead,
Wait,
I'm kidding,
Doobie.
I'm kidding.
Doobie has one.
Go ahead.
Well,
Doobie.
okay, so
Oh no.
I'm really like I hope like a Muslim presidential candidate runs at some point and like it's really popular because I would love to see somebody ask him the
We
AQ.
already had one for
Yeah, it was
for
Obama.
Barack.
Yeah.
No, like a real one. Okay, like
Oh,
um,
Jesus.
Yeah, I'd love to see someone ask them or any Muslim politician the Aisha question. Because I feel like that's like
What is the
I feel like
Aisha
that's something
question?
that
That's gonna be
the
rough.
Aisha
Yeah,
question. Yeah, I feel like that's
that's gonna be
something
rough.
that is like overlooked in Islam that people shit on Christianity all the time, but if you're a Muslim and you think what most Muslims believe about Aisha and Muhammad, that's really fucking rough, right? And
So
I'm kind of curious to see like
yeah.
how people would react to that.
So just so to give you some backstory, I used to before I was like on Twitch and stuff, I used to like argue with a bunch of these like I talk about it pretty often. These old like fundamentalists, like Muslim guys, or they weren't really old, they were like more middle
It's so
aged.
dangerous.
But I think the question that got me in the most heat with them was when I asked them the Aisha question. After that, I had one of them like constantly harassing me for like several weeks after about that, saying that I called like the prophet a pedo when I never did. I just asked the question.
But he was.
Yeah, he super was though. I will say it. I mean,
Yeah, I'm
Well,
kind of curious if that'd be like bigoted, right? To say, hey, we can't have you in office because you're Muslim and Muslims think this.
well,
really?
okay.
Is that like
So also to answer your question, there was one
oh,
sect
man.
of Muslims in that group who didn't believe in any of the hadiths, and the rest of
Yeah.
the Muslims hated those guys. They hated their asses. And then there are other people who think that it was like a miswriting or something of Aisha, and that maybe they forgot that she was
Yeah,
older,
that she might have
or
actually
that
been like 15 or 16 based on
or that
her
they forgot to take the one away for they
yeah.
accidentally put withheld a one in front of the 9 or whatever,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
so
that's my thing,
that's
right?
why,
Is that's
yeah.
where you have to figure out what the politician actually believes. Because I don't think the issues that I would have with if a president was like, I believe in Islam to a certain extent, I would have other questions for what extent too. Like, do you believe in death as a punishment for apostasy? Because that's also in the Quran. So it's like, if he says like, I don't believe that the Prophet Muhammad was a pedophile and I wouldn't endorse that, or I don't believe in death for apostasy, I think that was like a metaphorical thing, then I'm like, I mean, okay, like there's stuff in Levitican law that Christians don't endorse, but I feel like the New Testament does a better job of saying like, hey, that stuff is not like that was bad thing. We're going into better thing now. But I can empathize. Like, I wouldn't hold a politician accountable for something they literally don't believe. But if they were to show support for a group that did openly say, we believe that death for apostasy is a proper punishment and things like that, then I would
That
be like,
reflects on them.
all right, then no, I'm holding you accountable for your acceptance of a group like that, and I think you aren't fit to lead. Because if you're willing to support a group that believes in death for apostasy, and the Muslim definition for apostasy is anyone who is not Muslim at any point throughout their life, then I can't
That's
jive
not the
with
definition.
that.
I think
I know what
obviously-
you mean.
So
It's leaving the faith.
So
Well,
yeah, so
but they also
for-
say in the Quran that everyone is born a Muslim.
It-
So
yeah,
fundamentally,
it
by not
depends.
being one, you've left.
It depends because growing up, I believe when I went to like we had like our version of Sunday school. I didn't go for very long, but when I went there, one of the first things they said is like, Christians and Jews are like people of the book, just like Muslims are.
Yeah.
So it really depends on which sect the person is from.
Yeah.
And each person has like a different, it's the same thing with the Aisha stuff. Like everybody has a different explanation for why it is there, or why it's written the way it is, or whether it was a typo.
Yeah, but with the
And that's
Aisha thing,
why
the
it
reason
matters with like
so
what Muslim group they're involved with, because like a lot of Islamic groups in the United States are like much more moderate than you'd find elsewhere. And so like if we're looking at like American Muslims running for president or whatever, I think it would just be a matter of like looking at what specific group they're involved with, and if it's like a very extreme group or if it's a more moderate group. And either way, it's going to inform what you can understand about their beliefs. And like you might very well hold them accountable either. I mean, you should hold them accountable either way, and expect that whatever group that they do involve themselves with does reflect on their politics.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it's like, I have practicing Muslim friends where they interpret death for apostasy as the same thing as the Christian Bible says, which is basically by death, it means like you don't have access to eternal life after you die. It's like, all right, well, okay. I mean, I'm not going to, and I can still jive with those friends and we're fine. But again, if anybody I knew or anybody that wanted me to vote for them showed support for a group that believed that death means being killed as a person, then that's where I'd hold them accountable.
Also,
But
like,
I think
Biden's
there's
a
room.
Catholic, right? But like, he's not
Mhm.
exactly. He's not like super anti-abortion, and so
Yeah.
his actual affiliation with the group is like loose enough that progressives are not expecting him to be anti-abortion. They're not like holding him accountable to his faith in that sort of sense. So like it does matter to the extent that someone is, associated with the group. If they're just loosely associated, you probably don't
Yeah.
expect them to like rule, like totally in line with whatever that group's positions are.
Yeah.
I
And
think
they
I
could
think
be
that's
like
where-
me, where like I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in legislating religion in any way. So it's like, okay, well, if it's not going to affect how you lead, then maybe we can talk, kind of thing.
I think that's where like Doobie's point becomes a little bit more muddled, because I think that there are some Muslims where if you ask them that question, it's reasonable. Like for instance, I recall Destiny debating a completely insane Muslim guy at one of these in-person events, and he was like, he was a non-apologist Muslim, so he was like, oh yeah, no, like the age of consent should be whenever the woman hits puberty, and like you should be able to kill gay people for being gay and stuff. And if you were to ask that person those questions if he ran for office, that would be reasonable. But I think if a pretty standard secular Muslim American ran for office, right, and all of a sudden they were being peppered with questions about, like, despite a complete lack of history in both language and in action supporting things like that, obviously I think that's when you could, I think, rightfully be accused of some sort of Islamophobia. Just asking any Muslim, oh yes, I see you're Muslim, do you support female genital mutilation, do you support pedophilia? I mean, that's where, I mean, it becomes a bit stereotypical at that point.
But I don't. Well, the reason I think the Aisha thing is interesting is because the view that the age was incorrect, or that you're not going to look at the hadiths, that you're like a Quranist. These are like very slim minorities in Islam. The vast majority of Muslim scholars agree that she was 6 years old when they married and 9 years old when they consummated, when they had sex. Right, and they will have a few different ways to justify that or to be okay with that. So it's a much more common belief than like female genital mutilation, right? So so what I was trying to get to is, like, I wonder if if you guys would consider it bigoted for somebody to bring up a question like that with a Muslim politician. Say, hey, what do you think about Aisha? Like, what are your views on this thing? Right.
And I think
I
what
think in all
Akana Boy is saying is that like it depends on the specific Muslim politician. Because if it's someone who's like Muslim, but like is from a very like secular sort of interpretation of things, like they're American and they grew up in like a very moderate sort of environment, then you might be
Like, if
asking
you-
like
like,
just
if-
because of a tenuous relationship to the
Yeah.
faith. Whereas I think
Like
that
if
like
people,
yeah, so I would say that like the question is not inherently bigoted, but is more contextual. So like if someone does have connections to an Islamic group, the like most Islamic groups are pretty literalist with interpreting the Quran and the holy texts. So like I think it does make sense to like ask this question to a lot of people, but not in every circumstance.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah, I
it's
was
ever
gonna-
bigoted to ask, because just I make the connection to me. Would I be comfortable even if I was not super in? If I just said, yeah, I'm Christian, but like whatever, I wouldn't have a problem with someone being like, well, how do you feel about this stuff in Levitican law? I would just answer what I feel about that, and we'd move on, kind of thing. I don't think it's bigoted to ask people how they feel about things written in, the religious text of the religion they say they're connected to. I
Especially
don't
if
think
it's
bigoted.
asked like in good faith with like an
That's
earnest
the thing,
like
yeah.
I just want to know about your views because I want to know if I should vote for you. Then like it's a very reasonable to like ask that question. Whereas it might be more unreasonable if it's just like some secular Muslim and you're just like trying to grill them on very specific interpretations that like they probably don't have a big connection to in the same way that
Yeah, like if Peter Ducey is sitting back like, how do you feel about the age of Muhammad's wife in the Quran? Like at a White House press conference to like a press secretary who's Muslim, I'd be like, all right, asshole, shut the fuck up. But like, if there's an like a one-on-one campaign interview, and they're like, people have brought up your Muslim faith in relation to how you would lead. How strongly do you think it would impact it, and what is your response to some of these fundamental criticisms of how it might interact with it? I think that would be a good
That's a very
question.
honest, good faith like interpretation. Like you are genuinely just trying to figure out the extent of someone's belief system.
Yeah, I was going to give the example of Dr. Oz, who's currently running for Senate,
Oh,
right? Like
God.
he's been asked, right? How does how basically how serious of a Muslim is he, right? So like to what extent does that play a role in your day to day life and
Mhm.
stuff
Dr.
like that?
Oz?
But yeah.
Isn't he
The guy
endorsed
from
by
TV?
Trump?
Well,
He's been
he's
endorsed by Trump,
Turkish.
hasn't he?
The guy
He
from
has been,
TV,
yeah.
Dr. Oz?
I didn't know
Yeah,
he was
dude.
Muslim?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
Really?
he's Turkish, so he's
Oh.
like
Oh,
not
okay, I didn't know that.
not all Turkish people are
By the
Muslim.
way,
You go to-
chat,
Mhm.
like the fucking stream. There are 100 people here, and there are 33 likes on the fucking stream. What's going on here? Sorry.
His
Yeah, it
family is
says
very
that
like
but
spiritualist.
he's a secular
too.
Muslim and
Yeah.
opposed
Okay.
to Sharia law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Wait,
most.
but
I think
he's
most
a
American,
Sufi though.
He is Sufi. That's so
Yeah,
interesting.
that's not exactly secular.
Well, it says that in 2022, Oz said that he was a secular Muslim and is opposed to Sharia law.
Yeah, a lot of people have more cultural identifications with Islam, similar with
Right.
religion. Like how
Yeah,
many
that's like the
Christians? How
same
many
with
Christians in
Jews.
Yeah, like how many Christians in America just ignore half the shit the Bible says? I mean,
Mhm.
that's if Christians literally to the letter of the Bible followed everything in the Bible, we'd have a very different society. But the reality is, like, I think most Christians think of it more as a mild faith, a cultural understanding, a community they're a part of. And I think that if you polled, most Muslims in America, they're fairly secular in nature. We don't get like a random sample of Muslims that immigrate to this country. If we look at Dearborn, Michigan, which is a majority Muslim city, which has elected a Muslim mayor and a Muslim city council, it's not like they're enacting Sharia law. And
This
so,
is my understanding too.
yeah,
Like American
just
Muslims
to go
tend to
back-
be very moderate.
yeah, just to go back to the original point, I just don't think that it would be reasonable to start to, continuously pepper Muslim politicians with questions like that, especially like Taftosh said, if they're asked in bad faith, if it's like the MAGA Karen conservative saying, wait, when will you disavow Sharia, like shit like that. I mean, no, like fuck people that do that.
I don't
shit.
even think
That's
it's.
fucking
I don't even
ridiculous.
think that wanting to know if your politician is going to justify, a 50-something-year-old man fucking a 9-year-old is bad faith. I think it's a pretty.
He's not saying
I
that
don't
it's
know.
inherently bad faith, but like it can be, right? There's a way to
Yeah.
ask this question in a way that is like purely meant to like denigrate someone based on their faith and like tar them by association by saying
Yeah.
that like you're a secular Muslim, well other Muslim groups, have these like very strict belief systems. And like there's a certain point where if you're asking that over and over and like you already have good evidence that they like don't believe that, you are just asking as a way of like sort of pointing fingers or making fun. And I think that's
But
where
even
it goes.
secular Muslim. So unless you're saying somebody's like culturally a Muslim, and this is what like a secular Muslim is, not sure.
I mean that's
Right,
like
but if they identify as a Muslim and they attend mosque and all this sort of thing, right? I think that's enough to ask them the question, and if it not to be bad faith,
It's
because it's
not,
a
though.
genuine like
Well,
why?
there are plenty
don't-
of secular
we-
Muslims who will go to the mosque just for certain things, right? It's not like
Yeah, but
don't
that's
know.
why I think Doobie is saying there might be plenty of them, but I just want to make sure that I'm not voting for someone who is the exception to that rule.
Right.
Yeah,
I just
I think
just
the
don't
vast
think
majority.
because
Here's
again,
the thing.
there's-
Here's the thing. I think the vast majority of Muslims in the United States are people who are not in favor of Sharia law.
It's not even Sharia law, right? It's literally just the specific view that it was okay for Muhammad to fuck a 9-year-old.
Okay, but I don't. But the relevance of that question, I think, is only relevant insofar as that person doesn't have a record. When you described originally a Muslim politician running for president, right? It's probably not some Muslim like billionaire Trump guy who has no discernible, paper record, right? And if there was a Muslim politician who thought that the age of consent or the age of majority should be when a woman hits puberty, that's something that not only would you know, but even if you didn't, there's so many institutions to prevent that happening. And I think there's just so many equivalents that you could draw here where we would say like this is an offensive question to ask. I mean, I think it's, to me it's equivalent of
Yeah.
it's like asking it's like asking a trans woman if she's had like bottom surgery. I feel like, right, where it's like
What?
to some extent it's, well, yeah, I think to some extent it's like, one, it's none of your business really, and then two, I feel like that question, because of the society we live in, is considered somewhat offensive, right? And when you're
But
asking
if somebody,
Muslim,
but if somebody
Well-
has put their name beside, has identified themselves as a member of this group, and the vast majority of members in this group believe that it was okay for a 50-something-year-old man to fuck a 9-year-old, I think it's totally reasonable to ask them that question. I think it's kind of strange that we would say that it's offensive or it's not our business, right?
I mean,
just as you would say it's
can
our
I-
business if they
He's
were like a
just saying that,
Scientologist.
like, it depends
Can I have an example?
on
Like,
circumstances.
there's that guy in Tech. I'm not gonna place in Texas because I don't know quite where it is. But he built like the whole museum to the Noah's Ark, and he's like, here's how it could have happened. Like, if that guy runs for office, or anyone who kind of goes maybe to the same church as him, I think you could be like, do you think that the Earth is 6,000 years old and flat?
Mhm.
And like, you could ask that guy
Yes.
that. I think that would be fair.
But it
So
wouldn't be
you
fair
could
to
ask
like,
people
every
specific
Christian
things.
that, right?
Yeah, I think they're
not?
agreeing that if on their face it looks like somebody believes in that kind of stuff, that you can ask them. I think their disagreement is if it's just someone who is like, yes, I am Muslim, and that is all the information you have, and there's no indication that it is a big part of their life or anything, or even clear indication that it isn't, should you still be able to ask the
Well,
question?
I think you
I
should be
feel-
able to
I think
ask,
you
but it
should.
should
I think
be
you
in
should be
good
able to ask.
faith. So, like, in the way that, like, you should be able to ask Christians, like, hey, do you believe the world is like 6,000 years old? Like, you can ask Christian politicians that. But there is a point where, like, if you have a Christian politician on the campaign trail and, like, you are trying to debate God with them, like, you're just, like, asking them questions about, like, well, if God is all good and God is all powerful, like, this is the only thing you're asking them. Like, there is a point where you're like just trying to attack them for their religion rather
I
than
think they
trying
should
to
be
get
attacked.
information.
Maybe that's the difference. I think that they should be attacked for being kind of part of a religion.
like, do you think Christians
No,
should
I
be
don't think they
attacked?
should be.
I think
Yeah.
it's okay
Do
to
you
ask
think
them
Christians-
questions.
I'd like to know my politician believes in like angels and demons and fairies and shit. Like, of course I'd want to know that.
I just,
Okay.
And if they do,
obviously it's-
and if they express that belief, I'd want them to justify it.
Okay, obviously, if a Muslim expressed the belief that the age of majority should be when a woman hits puberty, that would be something that, of course, it would be reasonable to ask, and it would be reasonable to say, I'm not voting for you because you have that completely insane belief, right? All that I'm saying is that I think it's reasonable for a Muslim politician to be like, look, this is asked and answered. I get asked this every time I campaign, which is the truth for most Muslim politicians. They get harassed for being Muslim, and I just don't think that that's right. I think it's reasonable to say, like, not all religious, like, you can't judge an individual religious person by the worst examples of the people who follow that religion, right? And
But
those
again,
questions
with
are
the
important.
Aisha question
my
specifically,
my last sentence is that question specifically, I think, is bore out of pretty stereotypical views on how Muslims think about the relationship between Islam and government.
but it's stereotypical because it's the vast majority of Muslims, right? You're saying it's the worst examples, but it's
Do you
the
think,
vast
when you
majority
say the
of
vast
examples.
majority of Muslims, do you think
Most
the vast
Muslims,
majority of
even in the
Muslims,
United States, believe that Aisha was 7 years old when, I'm sorry, 6
Okay.
years old when she met up Muhammad, and 9
That's not the
years old when
question,
he
though.
fucked her. And
The
most of
question is-
them, if they would identify themselves as a Muslim, would say that Muhammad was a moral prophet, right? He was a prophet. He was some kind of like moral character, even just culturally. Right. So if they're going to make that connection and then identify themselves as a Muslim, right, I would have an issue with that. And I think it's totally reasonable to ask them that question, whether or not they've advocated to lower the age of consent. Just them associating themselves with the ideology is enough for me to want to ask them that question and challenge the ideology.
So, Doopy, is there a point? Do you think that if you've already asked that question and they've already established that they're like a secular Muslim, that they're like, like
if
the
they
Jewish
establish they don't
equivalent,
agree with that,
yeah, then
Yeah,
do you
they
think
say
that there's
they
a
don't-
point where it becomes like just picking on them for their religion? Where you already have the information, you know that they're a secular Muslim, and trying to debate them over it is just kind of like attacking them for loose connections.
well, I think if they say that they actually don't believe that, right, and they don't agree with that, and maybe they don't agree that the moon was cut in half either, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They don't believe that you should be able to have sex slaves. If they say they don't agree with all these things in the Quran, well, then I'd ask them why they identify as a Muslim. And if it's just a cultural thing, I'd ask them why they continue to identify their culture, their upbringing, with this holy book that has all this terrible shit inside of it that you'd like to like separate yourself from. I mean, so I think again, so if they're choosing to, just as somebody, if somebody were naming themselves a Scientologist, but they're a secular Scientologist, right? Because their parents were Scientologists and they're raised in the church, but as they
They're
grew up, they kind of
culturally
pulled
and
away from it. They don't
ethnically
really,
Scientologists.
yeah. And these people do exist, right? People who are raised by Scientologist parents, but aren't really in the church, but they consider themselves so Scientologists because that's how they grew up. If somebody like that was running and they named themselves a Scientologist, I would still say, hey, why the fuck are you calling yourself a Scientologist? And I'd want to push them on that. Now, if they
I feel
told
like
me that they don't agree, right, that they think that that they are secular, et cetera, and I keep pushing them on, hey, I think you're lying to me. I think you do think it's okay to fuck 9-year-olds. Then I think that can be. I wouldn't do that, right? But insofar as they identify with a group, they identify with a belief system in some way. I think it's totally fine to challenge a belief system.
Yeah, I think that
nobody's
the
saying
only
it's not okay
distinction
to
here
challenge it.
is we're saying that like it's appropriate to challenge them. It just has to be in good faith, right? Like you shouldn't be asking just to like attack the religion or the group, but like because you genuinely want to know about their positions. And I think that's the only like sort of distinction or line that people are trying to draw in the sand.
But I think it's okay to attack the religion and the group and the politician if they identify with the religion that I think
If
is
they're a
terrible.
part of it, yeah.
Yeah. So if someone's on the campaign trail calling themselves a Catholic or a Christian, and I think these religions are terrible, then yeah, I think it's totally okay, given that this person is running to be elected as my representative, to challenge them on that belief system.
Yeah, if like you ask them and they say that like, yes, I do believe these things, then you begin challenging them on those beliefs, right? But like the key here is you are first asking them, like, what is the extent of your religious faith? How far does it go? And will it inform your legislation? And then you're beginning to attack them on the belief. And the key there is you are treating them like as an individual and not just the group. And so you have to establish that by first interrogating their beliefs.
Yeah, sure. And if somebody is willing to, like Ilhan Omar, for example, calls herself a Sunni Muslim, right? Because she was raised in a Sunni Muslim family, and she identifies this way. She's spoken about discrimination against Muslims, et cetera, et cetera. So again, for me, whether or not this is a secular kind of Muslim hood for her, and I don't think it is, just the fact that she's identifying with this group is enough for me to pressure her as an individual who's identifying with that group. So it's not like I'm using her as as a proxy to attack Islam. I'm attacking her for associating herself with Islam.
I mean,
Yeah, but then
I think you have
but
to be
that's
careful with
almost like
this.
the definition of bigotry, though, right? Like
Yeah.
I just have an inherent distrust and antagonism towards this person because they identify or are part of a broader group. I mean, if that's not Islamophobia, if that's not bigotry, then I'm not
Do you
really
feel the
sure how
same
we
way
could.
if it were like a Scientologist or maybe someone who identified themselves as a fascist?
Well, you have to attack them
I
based on like
I don't
their
understand.
specific relationship with the group. So like their specific relationship. If you have someone who is like related to Islam, and there's like lots of ways you can be related to Islam. Like you could be supporting terrorist organizations in the Middle East that are like constantly claiming people's lives and are, making people's lives living hell in these areas. And I think that if they're associated with that group, like then you attack them on association to that group. But like you have to be careful because you can't just be like attacking the group and assuming that because like they both have like one person's Muslim and they're Muslim, that they're necessarily supporting like a specific group's actions.
Well, yeah. Well, again, the reason the Aisha thing is fine is because the vast majority of Muslims believe this, right? So have this belief, right? So I think it's fine to assume this, and if they don't have that belief, then they can tell me when I ask them the question, right?
Right, but the problem is though you said though that even if they said they didn't, you would still question why they're identifying with a group where some people hold this belief where the text is what it is, and
the vast
it
majority
sounds
of
like
people
there's
hold that belief.
no it sounds like there's no well, the vast majority of people might think that Aisha was like a young girl when she married Muhammad, but that's not really the question when we're talking about a governing standpoint. It's like, do Muslim people believe the age of majority in the countries they live in should be lowered to the point where the woman hits puberty, right? And that is not something the vast majority of Muslims in Western countries believe in, right? And
That's
so
not
you
what.
keep
Well, yeah,
on saying,
but I think
you keep on
separate from them
saying,
advocating
you,
for that
Well,
position,
wait,
I think
wait,
I think that
wait.
just
I do want to let him finish what he was saying because I think
I'm
he
sorry.
hadn't quite finished. So what were you
yeah,
saying?
it's just that you keep on saying like, and I think it is like, I mean, frankly, I do think it's an Islamophobic talking point. Like the vast majority of Muslims believe that Aisha was, basically underage by our standards. She was a little girl when she married Muhammad. I think what you're doing there is you're taking a descriptive fact and saying, I believe the historical account of Islam as dictated in the Hadith and the Quran, and you're transitively saying, I am now skeptical about whether or not all Muslim politicians would advocate for lowering the age of majority legally to when a woman hits puberty. And you can't necessarily make that connection. And that's not something the vast majority of Muslims in Western countries believe in. And I think that that's where rightfully someone with that mindset would be said to be Islamophobic.
Yeah, okay, but I think that I'm not saying that I think they'd be advocating for lowering the age of consent, right? I think that just the fact that they would, because the reason again that this is an issue for me isn't just that they would agree with me that Muhammad married a preteen and then fucked her, right? That's not the issue, right? The historical fact of the matter. It's the further implication, right? Because Islam says that Muhammad lived the most moral life possible for a human being, right? So given that he was fucking a preteen, I think most people wouldn't call that a moral thing to do. Wouldn't call him a moral person, right? In addition to all the other crazy shit that he did, right? That's in the Quran and in the Hadiths. So if they call themselves a Muslim, and they, like most Muslims, like I think the vast majority of Muslims would say that Muhammad lived the most moral life that a human being could live, but he was fucking a child. Whether or not they're trying to raise the age of consent is kind of irrelevant, right? It's that belief that's the issue,
Yeah,
right?
but if you're
So,
going based off of a strict interpretation of Islam, Islam also says that to live your most moral life, Muslims ought follow the law of the land in which they immigrate,
but it
right? And
also
so if
says that
you're
they
if
must
you're no
change
no
the law of the land,
but
right? To
but
be
really but really quick though, the only point is just to say that if we're going based off like the strictest interpretations of Islam, right? I'm just not sure it's reasonable to say that, okay, well, Muslims not only do they believe in those things, they believe in it civically and also in policy, and therefore in a historically secular and sort of Western country that if elected they would uh, they would advocate to change those laws. We don't see any Muslim politicians doing that in this country. Like, I mean, maybe you can find them.
wait, hold on. So
I would go so far as to
maybe I
say
found the issue.
there's.
I think I
Okay, go
found
on.
the so for me, I think most people, the fact that a politician would justify or say that a man who was fucking a 9-year-old is a moral person, right? Could in any historical context be doing a moral thing when he's fucking that 9-year-old. That for me is enough for me to like not want to vote for that person, whether or not they're going to try to lower the age of consent or put in Sharia law or any of these things, right? So that's
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's the point. So you would say that, hey, even if this politician is saying that this man 1500 years ago was acting totally morally while fucking this child, even if this person agrees with that, well, hey, so long as they don't put into use that position to change the law or to justify advocating for lowering the age of consent, whatever, I'm fine with him having that belief that it can be moral to fuck a 9-year-old. Like I would disagree with that,
no,
like,
no.
completely.
You can no, you can have, like, for instance, if someone was like, as unfair as it sounds, frankly, I mean, if someone was like a non-offending pedophile, let's say, right, and they were running for office, and it was known, like, oh, this is a non-offending pedophile running for office, even if they were like, oh no, like, I'd never hurt a kid, I'm non-offending, like, I'm, I'm chemically castrated or whatever it is, I would still be uncomfortable voting for that person because that's pretty weird, right? And so if a Muslim came out and said, oh yeah, no, like, it's completely moral to have sex with little girls, so long as you marry them, then that would obviously give me pause in voting for them, and I don't think that's unreasonable,
And
right?
you can not vote for someone for whatever reason you want. Like, that's totally fine. Like, even if it's like a terrible reason, like, that is
Yeah.
your right to not vote for someone. And like, frankly, the question of what do you think about the specific case in the Quran or elsewhere? What do you think how do you interpret this? What do you think about it? That's also a legitimate question, right? So like I think everyone here has already sort of accepted that it's okay to ask these questions. And I think, I don't know, the discussion just feels like we're sort of like wheedling around the edges of like, when does asking the question become unacceptable? And I think that Okano Boy is just saying that like, if you really have like no reason to suspect that this person has like the standard literal interpretation of the Quran, like they're a secular Muslim in America, there is a point, I think he's saying, where like asking the question doesn't really make sense because you already know the answer and you're just sort of trying to like cast or just sort of trying to attack Islam rather than actually grapple with the individual and their positions.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that. I think that I would be attacking the individual for their association with Islam, and I think Islam is perfectly fine. I think to attack either way.
That's not the same thing as attacking. That's like saying I'm assuming this black person is a criminal only on an individual level, but I'm doing it because most black people, most crime is committed by black people, right?
No, that's
I
not the
think
same.
is-
That's not
that's
the
not at all.
same because one's a set of beliefs.
Yeah,
I
one's a
think-
set of beliefs that they've
not, though.
voluntarily
Like, I-
associated
well,
themselves
Yes, it
with.
is a set of beliefs.
No. When I say it's not a set of beliefs, what I mean is that obviously Islam is a religion, right? So you believe in Islam, right? When I say it's not a set of beliefs, though, in reaction to that statement, it's to say that there is no one rightful, righteous interpretation of Islam. It's a religion, right? And so saying I'm judging this individual Muslim because of Islamic beliefs, to me doesn't really make sense because there's literally no way to ascertain what they actually believe with regards to their labeling
Well, there is a
of
way to
being a
ascertain
Muslim.
The way
that,
that
and it's
you
to
ask
ask
them.
right?
That's
And
what I'm
so-
saying. There's no way to ascertain that because of just the label. You have
Yes,
to ask
yeah.
individual questions and you have to judge individuals. You can't just say, this person's a Muslim, therefore I'm
Right.
associating with them and
Yeah.
I'm judging them because
Sure.
they're calling themselves a Muslim.
So would you say that you would just give them the benefit of the doubt and do be saying no, they're identifying as a Muslim, so I want them to affirm it?
Which I think is like
To the question, I don't even think it's necessarily wrong to ask in many contexts, right? Like we've talked about several contexts where it's appropriate, like past affiliations with group. Like if someone was like a Nation of Islam member,
yeah.
I'd be pretty okay interrogating them on their histories, right? This is where Keith Ellison gets criticized a lot for this because he did have affiliations with the Nation of Islam, but before he was like a national politician, right? And that's a circumstance where it would make sense. If someone has no discernible record, right? If it's like kind of a Dr. Oz situation where like he's just been a TV personality, he's not been like a well-known religious speaker or politician, not like a policy guy. That's where the question I think could make some
Makes
sense as
sense,
well.
yeah.
But if you've got an established politician, if you've got someone who has already previously professed like specific beliefs and interpretations personally on Islam, and you still have an inherent distrust where you either don't believe them or you're inherently skeptical of their ability to govern just because they're labeling themselves a Muslim, despite their record, despite their past statements. I mean, again, I rarely would call someone a bigot because it's hard, the evidence has to be there and it's hard to have that evidence. But if that's your circumstance, you're Islamophobic, right? You just don't like people that call themselves Muslim.
Yeah,
because you
or
have,
even past that, if
positions.
even to not attack an individual, even if you just want to say that practically there's no reason for them to even answer any questions at that point, because no matter what, unless they just
Right.
suddenly say, I'm renouncing my Muslim
They say they're not
culture,
Muslim.
Yeah, there's
yeah,
nothing that
you're
they
not
can
going to
say
be
you.
satisfied. So at that point, maybe it's not morally wrong to ask the question, but it's just it's just impractical. Like, why would you even? Because there's no answer that's going to satisfy you. Really?
So if somebody was running as a Scientologist, like, would you vote for them?
No. I strictly
isn't it-
even
why
if
isn't
they
that-
well, I'm saying you
What
might
if they
not
say that
you might
they're
not be a
secular
bigot for it. Yeah,
Scientologists?
I'm just saying I agree. There would be no practical reason for me to ask a Scientologist politician any questions because I just wouldn't vote for it.
I mean,
I
here's
don't-
another question. Is there a point where someone's affiliation with a specific group becomes so strong that like you would find it reasonable to disregard their claims and say like, I don't actually believe that you but take like the more moderate positions. I think that you are like hiding your
course.
power level, because I think that there is a
Yeah.
point where that could be
Mhm.
legitimate, and so like that there is a point where like you ignore the person's professations and you go with like the groups that they're associating with. So
Yeah,
if you
or
wanted to say like, hey, you were once a member of the Nation of Islam, so I'm pretty skeptical
and
of
you're still
your
like buddy
views in
buddy, and
general.
like you're still donating a lot, and
Right,
like
right.
and you're saying that you don't agree with them, but like these people, like you have constant interactions and they love you. Like there is a point, like I think that it does make sense to sort of criticize them just for their relationship. But
You guys
it's a
mind if
pretty
I-
high bar that you have to get to before that's the
Mhm.
case.
Sure.
You guys mind if I can come in with some super chats here?
Yeah.
Zonia says, can confirm
for
that
it.
Courtney has a baller little Tykes card that has seen some action.
Oh
I
God.
don't know how to feel about that. Elder Drazi says, ask Econoboy what the best way for you to invest my meager $10 to turn it into 1,000.
You should give it to me.
no, I
And
already
get all of your
Give
friends
it
to
to
give it to
Zathos.
me.
I already answered his question, so he doesn't even need one from Econoboy.
Oh, he says, call the boys' school he went to and have his license revoked. What?
He meant if he can't answer that question, get his license
Oh.
revoked. But I already gave a good answer, so that guy is well supplied with information now. I told him to buy a box of condoms and become a prostitute. He'll turn that $10 into 1,000 in no time.
Nice. Zonia says, I'm kind of with Doobie here. You should feel free to go after politicians for their religions. Their religious beliefs are likely to motivate their policy prescriptions. It should be okay to scrutinize that bias. Any responses to that?
I think that's
I
I
true.
don't
agree.
think anybody's saying
Absolutely.
anything
Yeah.
differently. I think the issue is just that the issue is not scrutinizing someone's religious beliefs. Like when Mitt Romney ran for president in 2012, when he won the
Mhm.
nomination in 2012, I should say, he was scrutinized because of his Mormon beliefs, because there's obviously a lot of stereotypes with regards to what Mormons believe, and there's also, by the text of the Book of Mormon, there's some stuff that doesn't quite jive with like a standard American ethos outside of Utah. And so he was scrutinized for that kind of stuff, right? It's just a matter of, and obviously Doobie, correct me if I'm wrong, it just sounds like Doobie has almost an inherent skepticism. And I think at one point Doobie did say, like, I don't even think I would believe someone who said anything different if they're labeling themselves as Muslim, but they're basically saying purely
No, that's
secular
not what I said.
things.
I said
what-
I'd wonder why they chose to identify themselves with that philosophy if they just are culturally like Middle Eastern or Arab or something.
At one point you did say, like, I wouldn't even believe them.
Do
Maybe
you
that was
really
with regards
wonder
to a
that?
different
Because I
issue.
feel like
but
that's a very normal thing to do, is like identify with something culturally or ethnically, even if you aren't practicing. Like,
Yeah, like Jews
There's
do it all the
lots of
time because
groups
there's
that
like
do
ethnic
this.
Judaism.
Yeah.
mhm.
Well, hold on. Jews are an ethno-religious group. They're a little bit different.
Yeah.
Well,
People
you
do
can say
this
you're
with
culturally
Christianity
Muslim.
as well.
That being
Doobie-
said,
Yeah, people are
Dude, would you
culturally
say-
Christian, culturally Jewish, culturally Muslim, right?
Right.
Like most
Which, yeah,
Americans
but that
are
being said, I think it's totally fine to
Christian.
challenge a Christian, for example,
Yeah.
who calls themselves a Christian, but doesn't go to church services. Maybe they're not even a Sunday Christian, right? Maybe they just wear a cross, and that's the extent of their Christianhood. I think it's totally fine to say, hey, you say you're a Christian? What do you think about God massacring hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children in Noah's flood? Right? Do you think that really happened? And if they say no, well then okay. Well, what do you think about God mauling 24 children, two dozen little boys with bears for insulting a bold prophet? Right? And if they don't agree with that, and I just go down the list, and if they don't agree with any of this shit, then I'd wonder why they're calling themselves a Christian. If they don't agree with any of this, and maybe they don't even believe in God either, why call themselves this thing? Why associate themselves with this thing that I think is terrible?
So I got a question. Are you at the point with like a Muslim politician that I'm at with a Scientologist or Scientology sympathizing politician where you're like, if you justify the beliefs really at all, I can't vote for you?
So I don't, to be clear, I don't like any organized religion really.
No,
But
yeah, and
specifically Abrahamic
I'm just
religions are
asking.
like really specifically Abrahamic religions are really gross to me, right? So
Okay.
I'd be totally fine with somebody challenging a Christian, like Joe Biden, for example, or a Catholic, right? Saying, hey, what do you think about if you call yourself a Catholic and you go to mass and all that? What do you think about God massacring those little boys with bears, having them maul the little boys to death for making a joke and telling a bold guy to go to heaven again? right? And if he says he doesn't agree with that or he doesn't believe that or whatever, then yeah, I'd go down the list with him too. And if at the end of it he's separating himself entirely from this thing that he says he agrees with and he says identifies with, well then why fucking call yourself a Catholic? Just so that
But you wouldn't not
you know
vote
you think
for him
people should
on
be
that,
nice
right?
to each other. I if I had the choice to vote for somebody else, I'd vote for somebody else over
All right.
anybody who subscribed to
I mean,
that kind
most
of like
Christians
thinking.
don't even believe
So-
in biblical inerrancy, and like certainly most Jews don't either. And so like neither of these groups really take their holy books as like literal, and it's very much like there is a great leeway with interpretation, and that varies. Like obviously Catholics depend on the Catholic Church to like get their interpretation, but like Christians have like a ton of variants, and so there's like a lot of reasons why someone would identify as a Christian or as a Jew without holding every single belief or position that is presented in their books, because like both of these groups believe that their scripture is written by humans, and it's not
Yeah.
true with Muslims. So like maybe you could make a point there, but like it just doesn't seem unreasonable to me to imagine a Christian who identifies as Christian because they
I
believe in
think-
the Holy Trinity, but like doesn't believe in everything in the books.
Mhm.
Yeah,
If you
well,
guys don't mind, I have a couple more super chats here.
Yeah. And I got another
So-
question for Doobie after.
Okay. So Tyson says, I think it was 2 elections ago that there was a runner that did not do the Pledge of Allegiance because of his religion, and people lost their shit, saying he would place God over his duty to the country. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty reasonable reason to not vote for somebody if you disagree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if he
Uh,
wants to do it, why not? But he's
Yeah.
gonna get criticized for it. So
Zonia said, I am culturally a Manson family cultist, but identify and practice as an American Hindu nationalist. It is a joke. She also sent a super chat saying, you're still likely to have biases that stem from your identifying with your family's religion because you were raised with those beliefs. I don't identify as Christian because I find my family's religion absurd and often harmful.
Yeah. So that's kind of a question that I have. It's close a little bit to what I'm talking about with Doobie is what if they're the person who says they're Muslim, right? They're like, well, I'm Muslim, and what I mean by that is some of my family culture is informed by Muslim ideology that I learned when I was a kid. Like, I believe in a more submissive, stay-at-home wife, and that it's my responsibility to be the one who brings in the money and be the breadwinner, and it's her responsibility to take care of the kids. And then when I'm at home with my family, when it's time to lay the mats out and pray, I lay the mats out and pray with my family. But that's really the extent of my practice of Islam. But I still would call myself a Muslim because a non-Muslim wouldn't do those things. Would that be someone you could vote for?
I could vote for any of these people. I would just,
Mhm.
if I had a choice not to vote for somebody who's identifying themselves or associating themselves with a religious group that they don't even truly believe in, which is really
Mhm.
weird. But especially given that these religious groups have really terrible belief systems, so like inherent in them or closely associated with them. then
Yeah.
I'd question your judgment for doing this, right? And if I
Okay.
could vote for somebody else, I would.
So I think that's where I would probably say the line is for if it is, we don't even have to talk about moral, but if it's even practically worthwhile for you to ask any of the specific questions to them, because it seems like no matter what they answer, as long as at the end of the conversation they still identify as a Muslim, you're still going to think, yeah, I'm not going to vote for them if they're running against someone who doesn't identify with that religion. I don't know that there's much practical value to even asking the questions at that point because it doesn't seem like any answer is going to make it different.
I think it would,
which I think is
well,
definitionally like the good faith, bad faith distinction.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't think that's true. It's not that it wouldn't make it different, right? So if somebody told me in response to that question, for example,
Mhm.
that hey, back then, it was different times, back then it was totally fine for them to fuck a 9-year-old or whatever. Then and that was a response to that. So that'd be a totally different reaction for me. Somebody saying,
Mhm.
"Hey, yeah, actually, I don't think that was okay." Hey, that was back then, whatever. But still, I think it was wrong for that to have happened. But they still consider themselves a Muslim for other reasons, right?
Okay.
Then you're going to get a different reaction, right? But my issue is that I think a lot of these people get a pass, right? They say, "Hey, I'm a Catholic, or I'm a Muslim, or I'm Jewish, or whatever it is." but they don't get any pushback or questioning on the specifics of the ideology that they're associating themselves with. Right, and that's my problem. I feel like they identify as, hey, I'm a Christian, and that's it, right? Or I'm a Mormon, and that's it. They didn't ask Mitt Romney, hey, what do you think about black people in your ideology
They
being
bear
cursed
the
by
mark of
God?
Cain.
Yeah, like I feel like if you're going to associate yourself with an ideology that has these kind of beliefs, you should be pushed on it, right? Even if
Yeah.
it's like a loose association.
No, and I mean, if as long as it makes a difference for you, I mean, I agree with everything you said right there. And as long as it makes a difference for you, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking the questions. I think where Econo Boy and Taftaj have kind of mentioned is when it seems like people are asking the question not with an actual curiosity about the answer, but just with the intent to paint this person out to be someone worse than they are based on their beliefs, or just strictly because they don't like them and they want to essentially insult them with a question mark at the end.
Yep.
I think that's where they're like, that's
Yeah,
a
but
bad
I
faith question.
wouldn't-
Even though you can argue you're just asking them about their belief, you're clearly not interested in the answer, which I think is the bad faith, good faith distinction.
Yeah, well,
in
I
general.
think I would be, right. So again, different reactions from whether you justify the fucking with a 9-year-old or whether or not you say it was like not okay or whatever.
Yeah,
Because
so as long
I
as
mean,
it
I've
matters.
had a lot of conversations with Muslims about that, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So-
you will have plenty of them that will say, hey, yeah, it was fine. It was totally okay for this to happen. There's a special 9-year-old given to him by God. You know, she was as mature as a woman. She was very intelligent for a 9-year-old. Therefore, it's fine for him to fuck her. Like all these sorts of things, right? So you will have that. It's pretty common in Islam. So yeah, if they give me that answer, then yeah, they're gonna get a much different reaction from
What are
I got you.
acceptable answers from you?
to the Aisha question.
Mhm.
Just they would need to say, hey, yeah, that wasn't okay, not a good thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I think just as they would need to say that if I asked them about, the sex slave thing, about keeping women that your right hand took or whatever the fuck they're phrasing it. Yeah, if they said, hey, well, hey, it's in the Quran, this is what Allah said, this is what yada yada, then that would be an unacceptable answer for me, right? For them to justify this in any kind of way. But if they said, hey, that wasn't okay, these were different times, these were like warlords, etc. But obviously not a good thing. And hey, that's a different reaction for me than justifying this.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've reached the natural stopping point. I don't see any more super chats, but I thank you guys for all coming. Feel free to hang out if you want, but I'm probably going to switch gears here since we finished the panel up in relatively decent time. So yeah,
Whoop, whoop.
yeah,
When you bring
Pretty
me on
true.
panels, they go smoothly, Star.
yeah. True. So thank you guys so much for this.
There's some
I hope you had
intense
fun.
blood
Thank you for inviting
sports.
Yep.
True.
Mhm.
Yeah, super intense. Yeah, so intense, so unbelievably intense. So
We got into
have
it.
you guys been doing other than this
So good.
stuff?
Pretty good, yeah. I mean, I still am too lazy to actually stream on my own, but IRL life is good.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Besides the illness, I'm doing great.
Hell yeah.
Mhm.
I think I'm coming down with something myself.
Mm.
Zonia super chatted to say Doobie won.
All right.
So,
Good job, Doobie. Proud of
It's-
you.
I'm
Like
proud
I
of you.
said,
I do what I
Dibby's
can.
my special 9-year-old.
Jesus Christ.
Ugh.
Oh, I'm supposed to show. I'm supposed to show something.
Okay, chill.
The 22nd, we have Tony McFadden coming onto the server. She is a pro-life advocate, international speaker for Turning Point USA, unfortunately. And her whole thing is she's a black woman who, got pregnant when she was a teenager and then went to a clinic where she feels like they pressured her to have an abortion. And
Wow.
since then, she's gone around the country trying to convince, women of color, but women in general, to avoid these gas chambers for minority children. Basically, is how she presents it. So she'll be there the 22nd, and then at the end of the month, on the 30th, we're having Alex Stein, the guy who got in trouble recently for
Whoa.
calling
The
AOC
man, the myth, the legend.
the big booty Latina guy. Yeah,
Yeah,
he'll
fuck
be there.
that guy, dude. But yeah, go
That should
watch
be a good
him make
time.
a fool of himself on whatever Doobie's doing. But
Yeah, I didn't realize
also-
this, but apparently Stardust and I were on a panel with him like a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
guy,
Yeah,
really?
he's been
I've
on.
debated
He's been
him
on
a few
panels.
times. Yeah.
I didn't have any problems with him, man, until he just fucking blatantly sexually harassed somebody and thought it was like super funny.
I was in a debate the other night, and people were saying that it wasn't sexual harassment.
They're so fucking stupid. I literally I went on a tweet storm about it. I was so pissed. I was like, I hope any of the wannabe macho alpha Republican dudes who are defending it, I hope their wives and their daughters see their reactions so they know just how fucking useless and giggly their husband or dad is going to be if someone ever does that to them.
Well, that was
Because
my
holy
point.
shit.
I was like, imagine if someone does this to your wife or daughter. Like, how would you feel about it then? And the answer
Yeah.
is you'd feel like it's sexual harassment then.
Mhm.
It got into this technicality where people are saying that like, well, she didn't actually like hear what he was saying. And at first she just thought he was like asking for a selfie. And it was like, is it sexual harassment at the point where like she doesn't know? And like we got into like the mud there. But yeah,
Holy
I think
shit.
that like very clearly when someone is like realizes what's happening and is like, I'm not comfortable with this, it becomes sexual
Yeah.
harassment.
And
Got a
also
few
he
more
filmed
super
it.
chats, by the way.
Yeah.
So
Andrew Smith super chatted to say Zonia won. Eli Goose super chatted to say Akana Boy won. So it just looks like it's all up in the air now. So
My goodness.
yeah,
hey,
Stop the
sounds like
count.
the viewers won.
I think the viewers.
I
won
think we
as well.
all won tonight.
I think so too. I think this is a very nice
Hmm.
night for Supernova. So yeah.
Sweet.
Sarah's
There we
one
go.
best host. Thank you. Somebody just insulted me on Twitter a few minutes ago. Your show sucks. You're like a dog. I'm like, what?
Like a
Like,
I don't,
dog.
I don't get how
My
those
dogs
two
are
could-
great.
Like a dog. Okay.
Dogs
Let
are
me see, like-
notoriously bad at hosting panels,
Yeah.
Stardust. You gotta make the connection.
Stardust has the
Here it is.
dog in her.
Yeah.
Here it is. Your show sucks and is irredeemably boring, and you have the personality of a dog. You should pack
Oh,
it up
okay.
and get off the internet forever.
You're very
love
loyal and
dogs.
loving Stardust. It's
Dogs are great.
disgusting.
Yeah.
Zonia says, April, you agreed with us in the end that the initial incident wasn't harassment.
I
right?
think if she doesn't know, like, I don't think you could say it's harassment if she's like totally unaware of the situation. But I think it's like obviously harassment once she does realize what's happening and it continues.
I don't know if that matters though, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sure
I
we
don't
can
think so
construct
either.
scenarios where like someone is not aware that you're sexually harassing them, but it's still sexual harassment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like if some
I think
s-
it's
plenty
more
of
that,
kids
like-
grow up.
No,
Sorry.
'cause I think that like you do have to be made aware. So like the discussion got into like if you go up to someone in the gym and you're like, "Whoa, nice muscles. Like I really like them. You look really great." I don't think that's sexual harassment until the person like expresses that they're like, "Hey, like I'm not comfortable with this." Then I think it becomes sexual harassment.
Yeah, but that's the
if
inverse,
I
though.
if I found Brento sleeping and I just took out my dick and jerked off like right over him, didn't come on him, but I washed him and I jerked off like right next to him,
Respectful.
and he was asleep the entire time. Like, would that like not be inappropriate?
I'm not sure.
I think-
It would be inappropriate, but I'm not sure it'd be sexual harassment.
You're not sure?
I think it's sexual harassment just because
He's not sure
in
because
this
Brento would like it.
specific in this specific situation, I'm pretty sure it's sexual harassment because I'm pretty sure she knew what he was saying, and even if she didn't know initially what he was saying, once she walked up to him, he continued saying it. And
Well, she
I
responded
don't think there's
positively at first. She was like flashing the peace sign and she was like, "Hey, do you want a selfie?" And she like seemed okay with it. And so like because she seemed okay with it, I think that like it's a reasonable interpretation to be like, "Oh, she doesn't feel harassed and therefore this is like appropriate behavior." But I think once it becomes clear that like she's not okay with it, then I think you have to stop. You have to be like, "Okay, this is harassing her."
Yeah, I don't know, because I think he was clearly, when you listen to everything he was saying, he was clearly trying to say things to make her uncomfortable. And so him adding in like
Hello.
the big booty Latina
Sandy.
thing and you look so sexy into that, I think shows that his intent with those comments was to continue to make her uncomfortable.
Mhm.
That's
so there
my
are plenty of
opinion.
kids who grow up
So-
getting like sexually harassed and and they don't know that what their experience is sexual harassment or sexual,
Mhm.
like misconduct, right? And it's
Yeah.
still, we would still consider it harassment or misconduct.
Yeah, and so
even though
maybe yeah,
we're unaware of those boundaries needing to be there.
yeah,
Well,
maybe
like, as
harassment.
the
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, as the panel went on, we kind of learned a bit more about the context of the situation and put it together that even AOC didn't know that he was making sexual comments about her, the way that she looks. So she figured out after the fact, and then went online and said, basically called it out for what it is.
Mhm.
And then Alex Stein just, dialed it up to 11 and kept reiterating it and doubling down on it and tripling down on it. That's where the harassment is after she identified it and said, okay, this isn't okay. It's after the fact where it became harassment. The initial incident, though, not so much. And that was
Yeah.
what we all kind of agreed to in the end.
I guess I can concede that maybe the line for harassment, in my opinion, the line for harassment would be him filming it and posting the video, or even videotaping it for the purpose to film it, because he is then trying to kind of make those sexual comments that he clearly knew were going to be offensive, and that's why he was saying them, like, public, so that she would constantly be confronted with the video. But I don't really care what was harassment, what wasn't. It was incel rat behavior from the beginning.
Oh,
That's-
yeah.
And so that's why I stuck to that terminology on my Twitter tirade about it, is he's a fucking incel rat, and I don't think anybody who's a self-respecting conservative who claims to have like conservative or chivalrous values in any kind of way can justify kicking it and being cool with him and not like publicly criticizing him. I think there was a huge failure on the part of conservatives for not publicly criticizing him. Bill O'Reilly was like one of the few to do it.
I was, yeah, that's true. My position was that Stein is sort of like this, like, lowbrow in the gutter insult comic kind of guy. So I don't care as much about what he did. It's more about what others did. And the problem with people who propped up what Alex Stein was doing, my argument was that if they do consider themselves to be conservative, I'd ask you, then what are your conservative values? But in addition to that, it's also kind of a self-report for those people that they are unable to take down AOC based on her policy positions and what it is that you politically disagree with. You have to resort to getting in on Alex Stein's lowbrow, gutter scraping, garbage.
Well, I think
So
there's
that's
like
the way I
there's
saw
another
it.
variable here, which is that like whether or not the behavior is something that's like an edge case where people could reasonably like expect someone to be okay with it, or it would obviously not be something that is appropriate unless you get explicit consent. And so like I think that when we're talking about giving people compliments, it's one of these things where the gray area for compliments being sexual harassment is vague enough that I think it's appropriate to demand or to like put the line on harassment when someone is saying, like, expressing discomfort with it, because you can give people compliments and they can be like comfortable with it and fine, which is what it seemed like was happening in the video, where AOC seemed okay with him yelling like big booty Latina at her until later. And so like that's where I think you have to say, well, because she seemed okay with it, it doesn't feel like harassment until she expresses discomfort with it, and then it becomes harassment.
Yeah, and
Dude,
that's when Stein should have just taken the video down at that point, in my opinion. But obviously, that's not Stein's agenda. He's not going to do that. But everybody else who professes to have like conservative values or care about like the treatment of the women in their own lives is being a hypocrite and has double standards. So in they're perpetuating the harassment.
My thing is like I think her the perception of how she is taking it becomes irrelevant when there's pretty clear evidence that his goal was to make her uncomfortable. I think that is sufficient for harassment. And I think he's showed over and over again that his goal with saying those things to her in that moment was to make her uncomfortable.
And how do we
And so
know
for me, it's
that?
harassment
It's because
anyway.
he continued
Yeah.
to do it after
Yeah.
she seemed
It
uncomfortable.
does.
Yeah.
That's how we know.
Seems like he
his
was
goal
he was
is to make her
intentionally
uncomfortable.
he was intentionally I would say he was attempting to harass her, not in like a criminal way, but if he wasn't even saying anything sexually, I would say you would say like, was he there to harass her? Yeah, I think he was there to like, go, hey AOC, blah 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 blah, and get her to like, look at him or pay attention or, or react
And we know
in some
that
way.
because of all of the context around the event and
Yeah.
the kind
Yeah,
of person
but
that he is.
but my thing with that is like if I kill somebody and make it look like an accident and then I confess later, it didn't become murder once I confessed. I let you know that it was murder from the onset. So I think that the way he's acted since isn't when it became harassment. It was him letting us know. It was his confession that it was harassment from the beginning. In the way that I look at it.
or intended.
I mean,
to
it
be
was obvious that he
harassment,
also
right?
wants to like degrade and degrade her and make her feel like shit, right? So
Yeah.
So
so
I
he
mean,
was
like
reveling in it.
here's the analogy: is like if you intend to murder someone, right? But then you end up like, accidentally like bumping into the person and they die, right? But that was not like your intention to kill them in that moment. Then I don't think that you can get like charged for murder in that case. Like you can't
Manslaughter
Yeah,
is
That's
We have
manslaughter.
one
manslaughter.
yeah.
super chat, by the way. Rumpley asked, could you ask Doobie if he knows how rabbis and Old Testament Christian scholars address Elisha, the bears, and the children? If not, he may want to look into it. I don't know what that is. So.
That's the bears eating the kids
Yeah,
because they
that's
insulted the
bears
bald man thing.
eating the kid.
Hmm.
Oh, man, the
Aye.
bald joke really just did not fly back then, huh?
Nope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the context is there's a prophet Elisha who I think his job was to go around spreading the word of God, et cetera, et cetera. And on the way outside of on the road outside of one of the major cities, he was accosted by I want to say it's like either 22 or 42. It's one of those. I can't remember off the top of my head. Children. Typically, what they'll say is, "Hey, Ashley, these weren't children; these were young men." And young men could mean like 20-year-olds, right? So that's one of the responses. But even so, I don't think it's reasonable for a guy to have 22 young men mauled by bears for insulting a prophet of God, right?
I mean,
That's
what
a
did they
I
little
don't
say?
know.
They
It sounds
call
like
him
a good
Melonhead or
time,
something?
Doobie.
I'm sorry, was that Stardust?
Did they call him Melonhead or something? Like what?
No,
what was
so
it?
so his story was that he had gone to heaven, right? So they said, so when they were mocking him, they said, "Go up, you bald head," right? So go back up to heaven, show us, basically, right? That you can go to heaven.
Oh,
So demanding this of him was like an insult, and he'd been like promised like the armor of God or whatever, the protection of God. So when he cursed them, God sent two bears to maul them.
damn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way,
So
hello, Cherry.
Hi, Cherry.
Hey, what's up?
Oh, not much.
Hello, Cherry.
We're just post panel chilling. So,
Yeah.
I really wanted to come in because I thought it is wild to say that it's not sexual harassment until AOC decides it's sexual harassment. This is a crazy thing to say.
Well, do we
I don't
apply
think
the
so.
same
Well, the
rules
her-
to sexual assault? Right? Like again, with people, there are plenty of people who grow up not knowing people. Like somebody taking their dick out and rubbing it on them is like not
Yeah,
sexual
exactly.
assault, right? But we would still say it is. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean,
I
like,
think
the
it's the
reason we say
harassment.
that is because like they are incapable of ever like saying that it's okay, right? When we're talking about like statutory rape, and so like it doesn't really matter what like children think, whether it's like appropriate or inappropriate. Like it just is inappropriate because they don't have the capacity to consent anyway. And so like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what they think in that scenario. With adults, it does matter. Like if you go to a woman and like you are complimenting her, perhaps very crassly, like whether that is harassment or not harassment depends on your relationship with the person and what they've like made, explicitly comfortable or uncomfortable with.
Okay, but even just there, Alex Stein has no fucking relationship with AOC.
Yeah, but like
What
here's the
if
thing.
she-
If he's, yelling things at her,
Not that I agree with you, because I
Yeah.
don't.
if he's
But
yelling-
even to your logic.
Yeah, I know. And this is why I said that it's like harassment, because he like, continued this behavior, like very obviously when she was
Yeah.
not okay with it. And so I think that,
Yeah,
like,
the continuation of it is a harassment, the way I see it. Not so
Yeah.
much what she says, but what she says does play a bit of a role, because
it does
if
play-
she actually enjoyed the intention, then it by definition wouldn't be harassment from her
and
perspective,
so like
right?
I
Yeah,
think that like
but
it can be
the-
harassment retrospectively if someone says that like I'm
Yeah.
not okay with that behavior. So like if you're engaged, if you're like calling someone, like the example we had in our discussion was that like if you go up to this guy in the gym and you're like complimenting his muscles and he's like I'm not comfortable with that, like what you've done therefore is harassment, and it's up to you to stop doing those compliments. And because compliments are like the kind of thing where people draw the line in different places, and someone can really draw that line like wherever they want, even if it's like the first compliment was fine, but continuing to do that, they might say that like by the fifth one it's not okay, right? And so that's why
Yeah.
it's important to like have those negotiations between
So,
individuals.
I
Yeah,
feel
I
like-
disagree with that because I think both of those arguments pull intent out of the conversation. I don't think when you compliment someone at the gym and then they say I'm uncomfortable with it, that then retroactively becomes harassment because you personally didn't know. My issue is what Alex Stein has done since has informed us that he knew and
And was
purposefully
intending to harass her.
was intending to harass
Yeah.
her, and so it was harassment from the moment he did that. We didn't find out that till later, but I still think that it was
Well,
harassment
I think
in
it would
that
be
moment.
harassment
Wait, why-
even if he
but
didn't intend
We
it to
all,
be
think-
harassment.
we all
think
know
it
who
was-
Alex
Different
Stein is,
sharing.
right?
I don't know who
Okay,
that is.
so somebody in chat made a really good point. Bosset asked, young women have been raped because they were drugged to the point where they didn't make it clear. Is that not assault? Why is harassment
Oh
different?
god. Okay. The problem is that like if someone can't consent, then it's never appropriate to like engage with them
Mhm.
sexually. So like it doesn't matter if they're like not saying anything, if they cannot say anything, or if they can't consent either way. Then it's all like harassment, right?
I feel like there's a lot of people who can be made very uncomfortable and unnecessarily by like telling people it's okay to say what you want to say, and just once they say no, then you stop. Like I think you can like show people to have a little bit more tact and like etiquette when they talk to other people, especially people they don't know.
I mean,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah,
should have
I think-
an understanding
that's-
I think-
of actual like social
I-
relationships.
The word
And I think that's a
harassment
perfectly
because-
fine expectation, but when we tack on the word harassment,
Yeah.
that changes the conditions, right?
Har-
So you
But-
could say that they are sexual comments.
Harassment is such a serious thing. Like if someone ever looked at anyone and they went like, "Yeah, that guy harasses women in the gym," I'd be like, "Oh, really?" If then you're like, "Oh, he asked this woman out, or he complimented her and she didn't like it once, and so he left," but he was harassing women. Like, no, that's like a serious thing. Like it's if you could technically, in the smallest sense, be like, this guy gave a woman a compliment. She said she didn't appreciate it. Maybe it was a bad one. Maybe it was a not bad one, right? But like, I think it almost like requires an intent. Maybe
Hey, but
it
hold
doesn't
on.
necessarily,
You guys are getting so nuanced for fucking Alex Stein, who goes out of his way
it's
to be
just the general
provocative.
thing. It's not for Alex
Okay.
Stein.
Well, we
It's
all
not for Alex
already
So
Stein.
long
agree
as we're
that
having
it's
this
harassment.
conversation outside of Alex Stein, because there's
Well, we're
nobody
having
who
it
should
broadly.
be looking for nuance in
We-
his situation.
We went to the
Great.
gym. We were in the gym, so we were talking.
Yeah, but I
about
felt
that.
like the
Yeah,
gym was
so-
supposed to be an
But also
analogy
the way that
to
this
like
conversation
to relate to the Alex
started
Stein
was that we
situation.
all
Well, I think we
said
agree.
that Alex
Okay,
Stein's
so-
what he did
I
was
think-
harassment.
So,
Like,
Boston
what I
has
would
a
say-
follow up on the question. Someone can't consent to the initial harassment and may not have the social position to fight back like AOC did, which is why the bar
I'm gonna take the
harassment.
destiny position.
clearly
You have to
unwelcome.
be like willing to say no. If it's just like if someone's complimenting
No,
you,
this is so much.
You
This is so much
need-
different.
you need to like we need to expect people to like have the power and the responsibility to be like, I'm uncomfortable with this. Like you can say
Yeah.
that.
I've got a question
Okay,
there
so
though.
I want to
Oh.
kind of put out that there is like Alex Stein. Obviously, yeah, we know that what he does, right? He's got a pattern, but I think that in order for us, we have to see some nuance in it, because we have to be able to say that the comments were sexual comments; they were objectifying.
Well, we said they're
right?
harassment. Like that was the
But
position.
and
we
maybe
came
he had
to.
the intent to get her to make her uncomfortable or to minimize her.
He
But-
basically said, "Fuck your beliefs, but you got a big ass. Good job."
So very minimizing, very objectifying. And but the harassment part is what comes of the repetition, right? Especially when someone has made it known that they don't want that kind of attention.
I think
Is
though,
it not just harassment going up to her workplace to say shit like that to her?
hmm
I
That's
mean,
one of my
yeah, I would
things.
say yes.
It's harassment because she's not comfortable with it. Like
But
No.
why-
Just going to Washington, D.C., to the steps of
Mhm.
whatever the fuck she was at, to tell her that he does not like her beliefs. She's killing babies, but she got a big ass and she's a sexy Latina. That to you is fine up until she tells him to stop and up until he like continues to repeat that.
No one's
Yeah,
saying it's
'cause-
fine. We're saying it's a problem.
No, but
Okay,
one
but if
thing-
you
Saying
can't
that
call
it
that
is
harassment, what are you
harassment.
calling
Hold
it?
on,
Because
I
she's
have
uncomfortable with it.
very pointed questions / points
Okay.
on this. So one, when we talk about like workplace harassment, right? The repetition thing goes out the window because in that context, it is implied that there is no consent for sexual conversation in that circumstance. And I think these are both, I don't think either of them are necessary to my argument, but I think both are sufficient. So one, I think that implication was there between Alex Stein and AOC because he had always been highly aggressive and critical toward her. She never liked him. He never liked her. I think it was implied there that no sexual comments would be considered appropriate and they would all be considered pretty degrading.
Yeah.
Two, though, the one question I would have is when you say, like, if there's not an opportunity to consent, then it's harassment. What I would say is, from where you guys were saying at the beginning, the reason she was okay with it was because she didn't hear what he was actually saying. I would argue then she didn't have the opportunity to give him consent to say those things. So it was
feel like-
harassment because of both of those
Well,
factors.
I think that like if someone literally like cannot hear you, like if I'm like talking to my friends and I'm like talking about AOC's body, like I don't think I'm harassing AOC by doing that. I think it becomes harassment.
What if
when,
other
like,
people can hear?
yeah, I don't think it's harassment unless like you're talking to the person and they've like, they're
No
uncomfortable
way.
with it. Yes, like if
I
you
think it's
talk
an
about
interesting
you
gray
AOC's
area.
body,
have to be harassing.
That still very much affects her when he's recording it and doing that
Yes.
shit. That is harassment.
That is harassment. But
Okay.
you're saying talking to your friend, right?
yes,
away from the
exactly.
person where
I'm
they
saying
can't
that
hear.
like if they literally are unable to like perceive what you are saying, right?
Yeah, of course.
So
Mhm.
the problem with it is that like she does eventually perceive it, right? And so like that's where it becomes bad, is like her
No.
capacity to perceive it. Whereas
Okay, but he's recording from the start. His intent
Yes.
is for her to hear, and he's recording from the start. It was
Yes.
always going to be heard, so it was always going to be harassment.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
we
I-
agree on
but,
that?
like,
I feel like this
the
is
problem
like
is
a
not
pretty
just the
frustrating-
words themselves, right? So like we can imagine a scenario where like someone goes up to AOC and says these things and she's comfortable with it because of her relationship with this person, right? So it's not the words themselves that are bad, it's the specific context in which he said the words. And like that is the entire point that I'm
Sure.
trying to get at. Where
Okay,
it's like,
no, I
Doobie
I
wants
give
to
up.
speak, by the way. He's
Okay.
been raising his hand for a while.
Oh, go ahead, Doobie. Sorry.
little froggy fingies.
I was just gonna say that I need to get going. So I'll talk to you
Okay.
later. Thank you for inviting me.
Bye, Doobie.
Bye,
Bye,
Doobie.
Doobie.
Thank you for joining
Doobie.
us, Doobie.
Peace.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
like,
no.
I
I'm gonna
feel like
watch
this is like a
out tonight
frustrating
over my bed.
conversation. I feel like this is a frustrating conversation because I don't think from either side the big debate should be like, yes, did what Alex Stein do technically count with a technical definition as sexual harassment? I think really the conversation should be, how big a piece of shit is Alex Stein for doing what he
True.
did, right?
Well, I think the
like,
issue is we all agree on that. So
Yeah.
I
yeah,
understand
Yeah,
for the
like
that's
sake of
everyone
discussion,
here says that it's
we were having
harassment.
we were having the semantic conversation about whether it was harassment, I think, because that was the one that was actually had contention. But I do agree, it presents an interesting gray area when she couldn't really hear what he was saying, but he was talking directly to her, to where it's like there's kind of a flavor of the Taftash analogy where you're talking to your friends and they can't hear you. But there's also a flavor of him talking directly to her, and she can hear him, and that what people thought happened. So it's like
And the
an
other thing is
interesting
that
gray
it's, like,
area.
public.
That's why I lean on the what I think is an equally sufficient argument, which is that I think there was a clear implication that no sexual comments were going to be invited between
I think the
those
other
two
thing
people.
too is that like if I record myself like talking with my friends about someone's body and like saying degrading things about that, and then I post that like publicly, and I'm like
Mm-hmm.
involving the person in that conversation, that would be like, that could constitute harassment. And it's because it's no longer just like a private conversation. I am like
Yeah.
actively involving the person. And so I think the
Well-
Alex Stein situation is more akin to that, where it's like
Mhm.
she's not aware and then she is made aware, and it becomes no longer like just saying it to yourself or whatever. It becomes something that involves her.
Yeah,
But I
and he's
think you and
obviously a
other
dumb
people-
fucking piece of shit.
And so I would say that
think
it
you and
becomes
other-
harassment at the point that it involves her, whether it's like a private conversation with my friends or with Alex Stein, you know, recording. If he like records, she doesn't hear it, whatever. Like I don't think that constitutes harassment, but it's
Mhm.
when it starts to involve her that it does.
Okay, can I throw a hypothetical since we're
Yes.
just shooting the shit? What if someone like Alex Stein did that same exact thing to a deaf person?
I think that if they're like aware of it, so like if they're recorded and that recording is sent to them and then it's like harassing them, then I think it counts as harassment.
Yeah.
I just don't know, but like Tap Touch, here's
think-
maybe a more fitted example. Like, what if there's like a girl who's deaf and you're like following you're following
Blind.
her from behind with a camera.
Mm.
Well, I don't know if blind matters, but like you're following her from behind with a camera, and because she can't hear you, obviously, you're just making comments. Oh my God, this girl's got a nice ass. Look how these hips and stuff like that. Like she might not be aware of it, but I feel like a reasonable third-party perspective, a reasonable third-party observer would say you're obviously sexually harassing this person, even if they're not personally aware of what you're doing.
Mhm.
That would
So
be
I think that,
sexually
like,
objectifying them.
yeah,
The
I don't
harassment
know.
isn't there
I
yet.
think we have to be careful with our language here, because like
Yeah.
you are not actually affecting her when you do this, unless like it becomes public. Like if you're just like, you know, muttering to yourself or whatever, or like, yeah, you're not involving people, you're not like, you know, encouraging people to like harass her or whatever.
It might be
Right,
encouraging
but that's
people.
not, but that's not
Well,
but that's not how we
just
determine
like when the
morality and law,
hypothetical.
though. Like
We're
for
talking
instance,
about the
we
word
wouldn't
harassment,
say,
though.
Yeah, no, I
If,
think
we,
that like
no,
if we
but
make
we-
the
I think you
definition
can
too
say, like,
broad and too
it's-
loose, then it becomes a useless thing.
I think it's
We use the term
No,
degrade-
harassment
that's
as a
not-
red flag, right?
But like
That's
it's
not the point I was
literally
thinking
not
about.
affecting her, so I don't think you could
No.
call it harassment. If
But
like
that's
in the
not how we
hypothetical,
determine.
you know, it has no effect on her.
So we know
Wilson has a
that
question
we know
in the
that
chat.
God damn
objectifying
it.
women
Yeah.
is well. I want to say this real quick. We know that sexually objectifying women is something that is a problem, and it's been steeped in our culture for a very long time. But the harassment is when it becomes this thing where someone has made it clear that it's affecting them and they don't want that, and that's where the harassment comes in. If we start just throwing the word harassment around at anything, it becomes a term that becomes useless effectively. Like
Well, I think it has
you know,
to
we can say
actually
that anything.
affect the person to be
You
Yeah,
guys
harassed.
so-
just don't even understand where
No,
we're throwing it
I
around
don't think that's true,
uselessly.
though. Yeah, like I don't on one hand I don't think we're necessarily throwing it around uselessly, and then on the other hand I just don't think that's a framework that we would use to establish whether or not something immoral or something against the law has happened, right? So I think what you would say within reason is that
We're not talking
if
about
a reasonable-
immoral or against the
No, no, no.
law.
no, I feel like
Oh,
we
go
kind of
ahead,
are,
go
though,
ahead.
'cause sexual harassment is an immoral thing, right? So the point is just to say that what Taftosh's point seems to be is that if a person is not consciously directly aware, and they have the capacity to be aware, like they're not disabled or anything like that, of sexual harassment going on, we can't call that sexual harassment, right? What I'm saying, though, is that I take issue with that framework because I feel like what we would rather say, which I think is probably a better rule for society, is that if a reasonable person under reasonable circumstance would otherwise not consent were they to be made aware of something happening, then that's when it becomes right or wrong. And that's when I think you could say it's sexual harassment or not, even if they're aware or not. Like, for instance,
So-
if you could skim $10 a month from someone's bank account without them noticing, we would still say that you're stealing with them. You're stealing from them, even if that's not like going to make a material difference to their well-being, even if they're not aware of it. And I think similarly, the example of the deaf girl who can't hear that you're sexually harassing her, I think that it's still sexual harassment, even if she's not aware of it, because she wouldn't consent to it probably if she was aware to it. And then a reasonable third-party observer would say, well, you're sexually harassing this person, although she's not aware of it actively happening.
I
Well,
think
yeah,
the problem is
simply-
that like if you are saying that like you would be uncomfortable, like AOC would probably be uncomfortable with people making like crass discussions about her body privately. But I don't think that AOC should have the power to like prevent people from ever commenting on her body privately, like among groups or whatever. And I think that's because like we believe that there's something important about being able to like speak your mind, as long as it's not like negatively affecting people. And in this case, it's not; it's private.
Well,
but
no,
we
direct,
don't think
direction
Wait.
of the words.
we
I
don't
think
think
we
that
can
like you
all
have a
agree.
right.
If I can just
We
butt in,
don't
I
think
want to
you
butt
have a
in
right
real
to, like,
quick,
take
real
people's
quick.
money. Yeah. Anyways.
So Boston in the chat asks if we had a different word for one-sided harassment, would we agree it's still not a good thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say that's not
I think
good.
we all
Everybody
agree.
here agrees.
I think
yeah,
I
that
think we
he's a
all
shit
agree that
human
reducing
being.
someone's value to sexual objectification is wrong,
Mhm.
and we can say that that is immoral. The question is like the harassment is where the question is. That's where we're splitting hairs.
And I would just say
Well, I
that,
think
like,
Bossett says it right, which is like the question is how should law consider it versus when does moral culpability start? I think morally you are guilty of harassment as long as you intend to harass them, and I'm certain that Alex Stein did. I don't think he could or should get punished under the law for it. I still think it is harassment, even under the legal definition. I think it is harassment. I just think the law would not be able to prove because they can't prove it because they can't prove his intent. But I personally believe that he intended to harass her, and so he did harass her, even under the legal definition of harassment. He just couldn't be legally charged for it.
There we go.
Boom. Mic drop.
I think we all agree. I mean, he harassed her. I think everyone's kind of on the
Dropping-
same page.
dropping
that
the
was
mic.
my
I don't
initial
know. Last
position, is
username,
that he
last
harassed
username
her.
just entered the chat and said you can't harass someone if they're never aware of it.
But my thing
Sure,
is,
but
The
that-
tree
she was
falling in the
aware
forest
of
with
it,
no one
so-
around. Does it make
But-
a sound?
Yeah, exactly.
you can. I think because what I pictured was like there's a girl that's walking down the street and you're like, you're fucking hot, and she's like, what? And you're like, nothing. You got a nice ass, and she's like, what? And you're like, nothing. I still think that girl has just been sexually harassed, even though she didn't know it. Because that guy directly involved her. She might realize, she might do the little, you know how your brain does like the post-processing and you're like, hey, wait a minute, he just said I had a nice ass. She's like, it could still happen later.
But
I
then
think
she
she was
is
still
aware.
harassed.
What about
Okay,
people watching too? Because I hear you guys talk about like AOC didn't know what he was saying in the beginning, but people like looking at that clip, looking at that video,
Yeah.
think that she's just walking up the stairs dealing with this sort of like banter thrown
Well,
at
she
her.
also,
Yeah,
I think the
and
problem
that's
is that
where I
she seemed
think
okay with it at first. Like she
Yeah.
like, you know, flashed him the peace sign.
I don't-
and was
I
I
asking
don't
for
know
a
if the peace
selfie.
sign. No, she did not look okay with it.
At first,
with the peace
yeah, 'cause
sign.
She did not, like,
Apparently, she
understand
asked. Apparently, she asked if he wanted a selfie, but then somebody said, "No, that's Alex Stein or something."
Yeah,
pulled her
but
away.
just being a
But-
politician and turning in at somebody who's yelling and offering them a selfie doesn't mean like you're fine. You can
Yeah.
absolutely be a celebrity, completely bothered, annoyed
Yeah.
on like your last string, and throw up a peace sign for a motherfucker. You know?
Okay,
Also,
but, like,
I
you
think
have to
she-
I don't
expect
know-
people to, like,
I
take
think-
some
I don't know the
actions, yeah.
specifics there. All I've
Her
heard.
explanation was that she was like, I thought about hitting him, but realized like I'm a politician and I shouldn't do that. So from what
That's
her,
what she
I don't know if
claimed.
I don't know if you guys have information outside of that. I believe her that she heard what he said and she went over pissed off, but then was like, I can't I
Okay,
can't
but,
just
like,
hit a
here-
dude
here's
like
the thing as well. If
I'm
you're,
not
like,
sure
saying-
about that.
If you're yelling at someone, right, and you say like sexual things to them, and they respond positively, like you have no way of understanding that like they don't want you to do that. And so I think that like you can't really like if I say
You-
like, "Whoa, nice
no.
muscles,"
In a
and they're
general
like, "Thanks,
sense.
man," and
So-
we leave it at that. Like I'm not.
So
harassing
now I
them.
feel.
in a
But then
general
at
sense
this point,
though.
I feel like we're disagreeing in that you think that what Alex Stein did in the beginning was okay, and like maybe he has some autistic reason for like continuing it or something.
I think that the problem is that Alex Stein very quickly knew that she was uncomfortable because she like
Yes.
turned away, right? And so like as soon as that happens, like his continuing to make comments like is absolutely harassment, and like his propagation on the internet of the video and the continued involvement of her is also harassment. And I think that you can also
I'm willing.
yeah
I'm
I-
willing to drop the harassment thing, right? So long as we just don't give him like an out or like an okay for any of his behavior. Like pick a different word. I'm fine with that. But don't be like, well, there's no way he could have known that she was not okay with it. Like, come on. He knew he was going
Yeah, I
there
don't think
to
that
make
was-
someone
Yeah, no,
fucking
no, no, no.
uncomfortable.
well, he did
Yeah,
know
no.
that she was
You
so
show-
not
I-
okay
If you
with it.
shout out loud that someone wants to kill babies, then you are obviously you have an antagonistic relationship to them, and what comes afterwards
Yeah.
is obviously going to be on that too.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
all agreed that what he did was wrong. What he did, he shouldn't have done. Where I felt the harassment came in is like what you were saying, Cherry. It's like all the other people watching it and
Mhm.
propagating it, sharing it around, etc. Like to me, that is the harassment because that's where it's absolutely clear that what his intent was, what her feelings were on it, and people are joking about it, sharing it around, and turning it into a fanfare. And I
Yeah.
think that's where the harassment is. And that was one of the conversations that we had with Scott on the panel that Taff and I were on. Is Scott was like, yeah, it's sexual harassment, and yeah, I'm okay with it, right?
Mhm.
And he even made his own edited version of the video, and so he's kind of like saying, yeah, it's okay to do this to politicians, and so it's kind of like he's got a very clear staked out position on it. But I think most people don't have that. I think most people are kind
Yeah.
of fooling themselves into thinking that they're not part of the harassment, that they're not perpetuating the harassment, and that they're instead getting in on sort of a joke and
Mhm.
playing it down. And I think that's where the real problem is there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's just
I
it's
gotta
really
bounce.
fucking. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I gotta
Next
bounce.
year's
I'm
have
gonna
to
go
bounce.
eat
See you,
dinner because it's
Jeptan.
8 o'clock. Love you all. It was a great
Bye.
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
great.
Yeah,
Peace.
good panel. Take care.
I
talking.
am gonna head out as well. It's been a great time talking about various issues with everyone.
Thank you,
It
Attaboy.
was
It
it
was
was a
fun.
good one.
Yeah,
It's
it was.
always fun talking with Stardust and Taftage, and it was good to meet Brento Box, although allegedly we've met before.
Many
Cherry,
times.
we haven't talked in a while. And I think Sonia we've talked before, so it's always
Yeah,
fun.
we have.
But
Yeah.
all right, have a good rest of y'all's night.
See
Take
ya.
care,
Yeah.
Convoy.
I would say that like
Um,
it's possible to harass someone without intending to harass them. So like I think that
Yeah.
if you make a comment against someone that's like sexual and they're like, "Hey, I'm not comfortable with that." Like I think you have to say that like, "Oh, I unintentionally did not mean to, but I've like sexually harassed this person." And I think that I would say that
Yeah, that can
is-
happen.
Yeah, I would say that that's sexual harassment. And so like in the Alex Stein case, I think that like if you yell at someone, something that's sexual, and they express discomfort with it, I think you've engaged in sexual harassment. And like you know that for the case. And like it's obviously more sexual harassment if you keep doing it. But I also think that like it does work retroactively. And like the actual, as far as like moral weight, is that like if you say something that's like off color and you're not intending to harass them, but like it is harassment, I think that's still bad to do, but not something that you should be like, legally charged for, because people are stupid and they make mistakes. And the problem, as far as like, real consequences need to be like maybe thought about, happens when it happens continually and after someone's expressed discomfort.
What happens to somebody if they get charged for harassment?
I'm not sure.
Because I just want to know, like, what we're protecting, like, a hypothetical Alex Stein from, if he does get, I don't know, a book thrown at him. I don't know what that is.
I don't think it matters, like, with
Is it
him
like community
specifically.
service?
I don't know, but I don't think it matters, like, what I think matters is, do we end up applying the term too loosely where it encapsulates far too many incidents that shouldn't be considered harassment, where other people can end up
I feel like when you are AOC and you are this really public, sexualized politician who I would say her attractiveness is used like against her by her enemies or whatever.
Yeah, they've been doing
I
that
think
from day one.
for someone like that to have internet celebrities thinking that they get to go viral by doing shit like this to her, I think she has the right to be able to like file complaints and try to have some sort of like legality behind her to stop this.
I agree. Well, okay, hold on. There's her. I don't. Well,
Without
okay.
worrying about Alex Stein's fees.
No. I see what you're saying. No, as a public
We're discussing
servant,
the
especially an
AOC
elected
incident.
representative, I think that we have to allow the criticism to be available. If you start doing that,
Hello,
that
Raisin.
becomes something where you
Thank
can
you for
start
rating me.
shoehorning in all kinds of things as harassment, when really it's actually criticism or public scrutiny.
He is not from her borough. I don't even think
He
he's from
doesn't
New York
matter.
City.
He doesn't matter. I'm just talking about in general. If you start trying to say that she has some legal recourse to silence him on these
Not to
on these
silence.
grounds.
She should be able to get a restraining order if she. I'm not saying Alex Stein did this, but like if there are other people who do stalk her and approach her in this way, does she not deserving of having a restraining order against certain people
Yeah,
that
no,
do
like
this?
law cannot happen. Like we cannot have an ordered society if we allow our politicians to be like stalked and like, you know, made uncomfortable wherever they go. And this is like my big problem also with like going to Supreme Court justices and like, you know, bullying them or like making it so they fear leaving their house. Like I think it's totally just destructive to having like a good functioning government. And so I think that it's like pretty reasonable to expect people to not like, you know, follow politicians or be harassing them all the time. I think that's not good. And so we need like some protections against that. But I think what
But
Zonia's
the
saying
me-
is that like we need to make sure that that's not like going to the extent where you're not allowed to say any negative comments about politicians ever, whether
Mhm.
they be on the
Yeah.
internet.
Well, the media is stalking and effectively harassing politicians all the time, not necessarily for sexual reasons, but do you think that is also wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if it's, I mean, it depends on what you mean by the media stalking and harassing them.
I
If
think
it's
you're
just like,
talking about paparazzi because media has designated like times with them, don't they?
Not always. There are reporters who will just kind of show up on the public
TMZ.
grounds. Well, not
Yeah, I
just
think they're
TMZ.
considered
Like,
paparazzi.
I mean, this is like that one reporter who was working for TYT for a while that TYT let go of because he like shoved
Mm.
his way in to put the mic in the face of someone.
Yeah, that's my exact thing. Like
Yeah.
that's more alternative media, and I think that's like I don't know. Isn't that essentially what some people on YouTube are trying to become?
But that dude had a press badge, so it was technically legitimate.
Oh, okay.
I think that there are I think it's a very difficult thing to try and build legal action around because it's too easy for it to accidentally encompass genuine or to be abused and encompass genuine scrutiny and you know press freedom, right? So I don't know how you would do that in a manner that doesn't get abused or accidentally encompass too much and infringe on freedom of press.
well, I don't think you have a right to like ask people questions at any time of the day. Like, and in fact,
Yeah.
with like politicians, like we want them to be like somewhat protected and like able to do their jobs and not be harassed constantly, whether that be like
Also,
just questions or whatever. So like,
also
I-
physical threat can affect what they do too, right? We don't
Yeah.
want them to feel like pressured to vote a certain way because of like
Yeah.
threats and shit like that.
Exactly.
No,
And so
I-
I think that like if you don't like how a politician is like never answering questions, well then there's like a simple solution for that, which is like vote against them, right? And so politicians can like compete with each other on the basis of like, well, I always go and talk to my detractors and like I always make time to like answer questions. And that's an attractive thing. But I don't think that we should have an expectation that politicians just like put up with like constant you know, public abuse from people that prevents them from like living their lives or, you know, actually engaging in the lawmaking that their job is.
I think they shouldn't have to deal with that, but I don't think that we should be granting them any more protection than they already have. I think politicians do need to fear us. I think they need to fear their people, and I think they need to recognize that their people collectively have more power than they do, and they should be wary of stepping incorrectly with their
No,
voters
I
and
think
with their
that the problem is that like we already have a
those they
mechanism
represent.
for like dealing with bad politicians, which is like the electoral process. And so like I don't think that the way to change a politician's votes is by like physical intimidation, which is what we're really talking about.
I think it should be an option. I
No,
think that
oh
we should
God.
basically keep the option on the table.
I
because
It's
disagree.
you
we-
can't. Here's the thing.
we-
You cannot remove that option. That option is inherent in humanity. It's not an option for a politician in a functioning society. Like
I think that it needs to be something that we at least allow some room for, right? Like the Second Amendment is effectively that. The Second Amendment is effectively let's not allow our government to become totalitarian and tyrannical.
Right.
But I'm also very much not
Well-
a fan of the Second Amendment. Like I think it's pretty
Best.
bad that we allow
Awesome.
people like the ability to control or like use such destructive force.
Oh, I
No,
thought
I
you
think
were
it's 100%
conservative.
necessary. 100% necessary.
I would say that
She's-
I'm right wing, but I'm not like a Republican.
She's
Not a
complicated.
gun toting. Gotcha.
I'm
Yeah.
pro
Yeah.
state.
I don't think
She-
our politicians should ever be in fear of violence any more than any single person living on Earth should be like in fear of violence. But you shouldn't live in ignorance of the fact that it's always a possibility. I feel like everyone is always aware that violence is
I think
possible.
politicians should have special protections, though, like
They-
beyond
yeah,
just the
I
average
agree.
person.
Yeah.
I think you want to make sure that they're not just simply, that anybody could assassinate them, obviously, but I think that they should also be wary of the collective power of their constituents, right? And I think that because if they are not aware of that, if they think that there isn't that collective power and that they could rig the system and such, or game the system, or use money to kind of push things in a certain direction, freely without any kind of other recourse to push back, then they will potentially do that. So there always needs to be that lingering sort of wariness that there is a collective power that can move against them, and that also includes the Second Amendment.
Yeah, okay.
I mean,
Zarnia, I
guess-
see where you're coming from, but I feel like on the other end, like the politician that I vote in, I want that motherfucker to be safe. You know? I feel like you're looking at it in the eyes of a politician who got elected that you didn't vote for. But if it was a politician that you voted for and they align with you, you would probably want that person to not be harassed, to have like protection, and to be able to make their political decisions without like threat or anything like that.
I think the case is
I
even
look at it a little
stronger.
bit more from like an anti-federalist kind of perspective, a little bit more fundamental than that. But I would be obviously there's only so much I could say. I would be willing to support the politicians that I voted for being forced out of their position if they reneged on their deals, if they reneged on what it is that we voted them in
Okay,
for.
but the process of how you remove them is very important here. Because I think that if you
Yeah.
are saying that like removal via like physical intimidation or force, I think that kind of policy is one that leads to like political chaos, entropy, and like destruction of trust within institutions. And so like it's very important that you have institutions that are
Yeah, she's
working
already
to-
saying she doesn't
I-
trust the feds.
It's well, like so. The other thing is that
Uh-huh.
like the press is one of these institutions. As long as you
Yeah,
have like a
I get-
functioning like press
I
and like
agree.
government,
I agree there are other means, but I am saying that the escalation of force should not be taken off the table.
It never is. It cannot be. It's a reality of life.
I don't know. I'm like
Anyone
so-
operating and not recognizing that
Basically,
is not.
I
you know.
don't think you should.
we
Engage
should
in
have-
force, like
I
almost
think that
ever.
I think
even
that
if
we
you
should have
really
an
disagree.
escalating number of measures available to us. So we should work through the existing system electorally and do as much as we can. But failing that, there should be the ability to escalate, and we do have that guaranteed to some degree within our Constitution.
I hate even talking about like that route. It feels so
I
larpy.
agree.
It feels so like dramatic and extreme, and I just don't think we're at the end of the world. Like, why do we even theorize about that?
I don't think so either, but it's one of those things where we should never dismiss it. We should never say it should go away.
But the conversation about whether AOC should be able to have a restraining order against someone who's stalking them ends up here.
It's what I'm saying is that you shouldn't be chipping away at the avenues that we have available to address these things.
I don't feel like anyone's chipping away at them.
No, because I think we already have avenues that are very
Probably,
effective
yeah.
for addressing these things that don't involve
Yeah,
like physical intimidation or harassment. And so I think
Yeah,
the problem is that
I
like,
agree.
if we existed in like a world where like elections didn't exist and we didn't have free press, and like the only way to make any difference would be like harassment or like physical intimidation, I think of a better case then. But even then, I think that like the best way to approach this is not like harassing politicians. It's
I
like
agree.
you try to like control the military and like gain like overwhelming monopoly on violence and then like take control that way. Like
Yeah, and we're not even talking about
Yeah.
someone who is going at AOC to change any political motives or anything. Alex
Yeah,
Stein
no,
just wants
no.
to be a fucking internet viral dipshit.
I guess what I'm trying to say is I would never afford politicians, like elected officials, any more protections than they already have.
Say that then. That's okay. Do you think they have enough? Do you think it's sufficient?
Yeah.
Yeah. They shouldn't all get armored cars or be driven to tanks, driven to work in tanks or something.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's just not
that's ridiculous,
necessary
of
for the
course, but
level
yeah.
of violence,
Yeah.
But I do think that like we allow too much. Personally, I think we allow too
Yeah.
much physical like intimidation of politicians.
Oh, yeah.
And just like political people. Like I think that like Brett Kavanaugh's like a good example. Like the process of like engaging politically with the system should not involve like standing around people's houses like all hours of the day.
I think the standing around houses thing is excessive, definitely. I don't think that you should do that. I think people should have the ability to go to their private space and have some, be able to detach from this stuff for a bit and decompress. So I think we should leave that alone. But I also have qualms with certain things. Like I really don't like when politicians are using taxpayer dollars to pay for really fine dining at places and stuff. Like that's something where I think that we should actually make it clear to them that we don't appreciate our tax dollars being used for those things. So one of the things I asked on the panel was like, was Brett Kavanaugh at a fine dining restaurant?
And he
And I
wasn't,
probably
I don't think. He was just at
He
like a
wasn't?
steakhouse.
Someone said it was, and I was like, okay, we'll drag him through the streets then.
Oh, I think
What?
someone said that like probably because they're like it's a rich asshole. Probably.
Yeah, I think that's what they said. But I was kind of memeing a bit there. But yeah, I think that I think excessive living on the dime of the taxpayer is some bullshit.
I mean, I also disagree. Like, I think that like politicians ideally should probably get like paid a lot more and like compensated in direct proportion to like how effective they are. So like a very effective politician.
Well, he's not a politician.
Yeah, that's fair. But like as like a principle, I think that like ideally like the president should probably receive a lot more money for like the responsibility of his station.
I think politicians should be paid relative to like the median income of the district that they represent.
I think that ideally, I think that like politicians should be able to like run the country and just like extract their own wages from like the tax pool.
No, I think that
Well,
I think they should
get
make.
paid.
I think they should be paid relative to the region that they represent, because that will encourage them to do what they can to boost the wages of their district and to improve the economic conditions of their district.
When you say extract their wages from the tax pool, I mean, they do extract their wages from the tax pool. They get paid by taxes, by the government, by what we pay.
What I mean is that like, I mean, we get like so esoteric here, but like ideally, I think that you should have like different areas of the country, and like the politicians of like that run San Francisco should be able to like set whatever taxes they want and then set their pay like whatever they want it to be based on those taxes. And it could be like they set their pay as like 90% of whatever taxes they draw in from the city. I think they should be able to do that, and then people like have the right to just not live in San Francisco and like
just move.
Yeah, just move. And like what we'll see is that like the states that attract the most people are the ones that have like the most reasonable tax policies.
The just move thing doesn't work though, especially if you're living in an area that's deeply nested regionally. It's not easy to move. Economically, you're disadvantaged from being able to just move. I don't think that works.
Or
I think these things
change your
sort
government
themselves
or something.
out over like long time scales.
Well, I think like my position has been this way for a long time, because I think it makes a lot of sense. Where if well, at least for elected representatives, but in general, I think most even appointed public officials should be making an income that is, well, elected in particular, I think is most important. Those who represent should be making an income that is relative to what is made in that region, because then they're motivated to try and improve those economic conditions for those who elected
Here's
them.
the thing. If you let politicians set their payment and whatever they want, they're still motivated to improve conditions. And it's because if you improve the conditions of your state, your city state, your actual state, whatever it is, so that the income is raising for the people within it, then you're able to extract higher taxes and therefore improve your wage. And so, like, by allowing politicians to set their own wages, you do encourage them to improve the standard of living of everyone under their purview, because that's directly related to how much tax they can extract from people.
Yeah, but that's way too dangerous, because if they just decide to just pull 90% and sit on it and not do much, then
you can
they're
leave.
gonna
Go to a place where they don't do that.
I'm just remembering H Bomber Guy's video from a few years ago. Just move. Where the fuck are they gonna move?
Okay,
Yeah.
this is like
Where the fuck
it's
are
like
they
the
gonna
selling
move?
the
man?
houses, right? Is that
Well,
the one where you're talking about?
That is, yeah, but that's where the floodwaters raising and then not having a
And
house
he's
that
like,
you can
sell the houses to who exactly?
Yeah, there's an
Fucking
additional condition in there,
Aquaman?
obviously, but there are other things beyond that prevent people from being able to move, like economic conditions, where they're regionally located, and how difficult it'd be to move, or having a support system with family around you, etc., and
So
extended family.
like I said, like, it gets pretty esoteric, but I think it would be really cool if you could designate like special economic zones there where like politicians or like whoever can buy access to them and set laws and regulations within the bounds of the Constitution within them. And then like people who decide to move there maybe get like a voucher that allows them to like redeem for $1,000, and then that helps them move out. Like, we're getting very esoteric here, but I think that like the ability to have freedom of movement is very important, and we should, like,
That
if
I
anything,
agree.
have like programs that allow people like access to freedom of movement. So like I think that would be a cool thing to subsidize within this hypothetical world where you make it so that ease of movement is very, very accessible.
Overall, I kind of agree with that, but there's one problem though, is because it's not all encompassing. When you come from an economically disadvantaged family, oftentimes you're living in a community with multiple generations of economic disadvantage, and part of what allows you to survive and function is the extended family and friendship network that you have within that community that helps you out with all kinds of things. So moving from that, even if you had a system that made it easier for people to move, you oftentimes wouldn't move because you'd be cutting yourself off from such a necessary network
But listen to
that
that,
you
like,
survive off of.
At the end of the day, the reason why they're not moving is because they like where they're living. And they see
Not
lots of
necessarily.
advantages. No,
They don't
yes,
necessarily like where they're living. They
because,
like the fact that they're reliant on the support network that they have
exactly.
with
They
extended
like the
family and
support
friends.
network. They find a lot of value in it. And that value overcomes however bad the area that they are in is.
It's more necessity than anything else.
So it's
it's
like,
very difficult to cut yourself off from that when you're coming from sort of the bottom of the economic ladder, because you are cutting yourself free not just from your support network, but you also don't have a strong economic basis to ensure supporting yourself through all issues that you may deal with and hardships.
and they're valuing that support network over whatever tyranny they're experiencing from their local government.
You kind of cut out for a bit there at the beginning. Say that again.
They're valuing that support network over whatever tyranny they're experiencing from their local government. Like, however
whatever
bad the tyranny
economic-
is,
or
it's
whatever-
not as bad as moving.
Or whatever economic limits and hardships you
So
have
like
to.
here's the other way to think about it, is that like the tyranny of the government, when you have freedom of choice, freedom of movement whenever you want for any reason, the tyranny of the government can never be worse than the negative experience of having to move, because as soon as it gets worse than having to move, people will just move.
Yeah, but
No,
a lot
that's
of
not true. That's not true. People will fight and stay for their land. They will fight the government.
Because they
you don't always just
enjoy
move.
their land more than
Well,
they
because-
enjoy moving, or more than
Because
they,
it's their
dislike the
life. It's
tyranny.
because someone might be being unfair to them, or there might be a tyrannical government. Moving is not the immediate or necessary answer to all situations with the government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's because like in our present system, we have like a system of electoralism where we can like remove politicians. So like you might not want to move because you believe that you have power to exert in the area later.
Well, it was not even so much about power. When you come from an economically disadvantaged perspective, there are a lot of unknowns. So just packing up and moving somewhere,
yeah.
your future is completely uncertain, and you're vulnerable to all kinds of additional hardships.
Which basically
that
means
your
that
local
you
support
prefer the
network
local
protects you.
tyranny of the government to the
No.
unknowns of moving. Yes.
No.
Well, no,
Yes.
it's you could fight it because you could. I mean, like the thing is, I'm not talking about fighting. You could be like, hey, we're going to get you out of the government. We're going to organize. We're going to vote. We're going to do something. You can't. It's just that like the idea is not either tyranny or move. You have other options.
Which is like staying and trying to exert power, right? And that's what I said with
Right.
the electoral system, where like
Right.
you might believe that if you stay, you can like change the government, and so that way you don't want to move, right? So that you're analyzing the situation and you're saying that like, well, the tyranny of the government is not so powerful that I have no other options here, so I'm going to stay and like try to change things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and it should be respected how powerful that support network can be. When you live in conditions where life is like your outcomes are very uncertain, that support network is highly valuable, more so than anything else.
It's
really
very valuable, yeah.
So that needs to be understood and recognized. And when you try and set up, when you lean on solutions that are like, well, let's just make it much more accessible for people to pack up and move into areas where they would be more economically advantaged, you have to account for these support networks from families that are multi-generationally economically disadvantaged.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, I think a lot of times, like when we also look at the state of poverty and economic disadvantage, you have people in areas that are like, frankly, they're just not able to find like good employment in a specific area, and that might have to do with a lot of things. Like if you're in an area where the local CVS like is constantly dealing with shoplifting and therefore like barely exists, barely is able to turn a profit, and like other stores are closing down, your ability to like accrue wealth and actually like put your children into college and to progress in society is like very limited just by like the geography that you're in. And so having the ability to like get out and that perhaps being subsidized is something that I think is going to allow people to build generational wealth over the long term. And
well,
part of it too is that like you don't have to go alone. Like you can get people with you to work with you and to move together and to continue to support each other.
Well, the problem is that you're leaning on a system that's effectively saying, let's condemn that area and just tell people there are better places to move to.
Yeah, which I think is like fine. Like I think people are like extremely, I don't know, people get like very attached to like the specific land they live on.
No, it's more the social network again. I mean, people do get attached to the land, but in the cases of economically disadvantaged regions, they get attached to the community.
I think that's true. And what I'm saying is that like if you're attached to the community, you are weighing the economic value that you get from the community that you're in versus the potential economic value that you'd get moving elsewhere. And
it's ultimately, more about,
if you're choosing to stay, you're saying that the value of staying where you are is more than the value of moving. So you're making a choice based on what you value more. But at the end of the day, you are making a choice.
Well, it's sort of reductive because what the value is certainty versus uncertainty. There's certainty, the expectation is lower, but there's certainty in this place where you've got multiple generations of a support network where, extended family and extended friends know each other and support each other. Leaving that creates uncertainty. Even if there is more economic advantage, there's no guarantee, like if you go elsewhere, there's no guarantee that you will reap that economic advantage if you get to another area.
There's an expected value of moving to another area, right? And you might like evaluate, like there's a 60% chance that my condition is only improved by like $100, right? There's like a 20% chance that my condition is unimproved by $100, and there's a
Mhm.
20% chance that my condition is improved by like $200, right? And then you compare that to like the economic value of like your community, and you're like, well, the economic value of my community is $150, and then you say like, well, okay, the expected value, which I'm like very certain of with staying, is higher than the expected value of moving. And so you make that like analysis where you're like, well, it could be good if I move, but like it's probably just going to be like slightly worse or perhaps much worse. And so you might
You
make the
know,
decision that like you're not going
I
to
mean,
move
you
under
see
I
that
don't
risk
think most
potential.
people are going to think about it in
Yeah.
those terms. I think
You
they're just
just
going to. I think
you
they're
just
just
kind
going to
of
yield to more to certainty over uncertainty.
you
I
look
think
like yeah, you
that's
look for what's important and you look for like what you feel you need to be successful and what you want for your life, and then you go to where you think you have the best opportunity of realizing that. And then if your city gets run by a bunch of assholes and idiots and you feel like they're standing in the way and you feel you've tried everything, you have no recourse, or you lose more by staying, then you go. But otherwise
I mean, I would
you don't
just
do
say
There's
that
anything.
like the
there's
right to
actually
exit is like very powerful. And so like if you enable people to exercise their right to exit, um, you know, and I would say that it's important to like enable people, the right to exit even more than they have just by default. I think that you can give people a lot of power in choosing their own destiny that way.
So there's another. I mean, I think we should find ways to empower people to like have many ways to actualize their economic success. That means by flexibility of movement, freedom of movement, etc. But I think a lot of people are going to choose not to because of the certainty versus uncertainty thing. However, there is one thing that I've definitely observed personally. This is more of an anecdote that I've experienced with multiple coworkers of mine. But a lot of coworkers of mine come from most of them don't. Most of them come from wealthy families, but many of them have come from poorer communities. And they they get their job here in Silicon Valley. They work for quite a while. They get married. Then they have kids, and then once they have kids, usually oftentimes what happens is they actually go back to their neighborhood because they want the support network. And so, because it's tough taking care of kids, especially when you're working. And Silicon Valley jobs tend to allow you to work from home. So many of them will go back
And
to their
isn't that
neighborhoods.
amazing that like
Yeah,
they're
and it effectively brings up the value of that community over time. The more and more that people do that, so that is something that can work. Is
yeah.
having the freedom of like giving them like educational and opportunities and scholarships that can get people to go out of those conditions where they can get a greater value of education and get a greater value of economic advantage. And then once they get to the point where they need like their family and extended family kind of help support kids and stuff, they go back and bring that education and economic value and raise a generation of kids that also have that advantage. And over time, that helps build up the community. And little by little, it should hopefully improve economic conditions and reduce a lot of the negatives of that region.
Yeah, I think
Hopefully.
I think that's a
Couchman for
fantastic
the-
point as far as how this, gets exercised in the real world. I'll let Stardust say
Oh
things.
yeah, Couchman just sent a super chat and said
Oh.
based panel. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like
Hold
I
on,
would say
I want to slide out. I feel like I'm taking up space. I didn't know when I could slide out. I
It's
love you guys.
enjoyable
Infinite
space.
space.
So
I'm
It's the
probably gonna
internet.
close this out soon, actually, because I'm super tired. And it's
Alright.
been like a
it
long
was
weekend.
fun.
yeah.
Thanks
Also,
for
we
joining
enjoy your
us,
presence, Cherry, even if you're not
Mhm.
talking.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks.
And I'll be sure to link your guys' stuff, guys. Go follow the panelists. I'll drop the links in the chat.
Yo.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good
Thanks for having
night.
me.
Good night. It was
Bye,
nice meeting you,
everyone.
Taff.
Yeah,
Nice
And
talking to
Nice.
everybody.
Senso, I've met you before.
Yeah, we met. All right.
We've all talked before. Bye.
Bye bye.
All right, guys. Amazing stream. Good job. You guys killed it. You went sicko mode on that stream. Bro, I think okay. I'm going to raid. I'm gonna raid someone controversial, okay? I'm gonna raid Keffels, because she's the only one streaming that I'm following, so. Oh, don't harass her, by the way. Don't be mean, okay? Look at what she's saying. Be like, what is this? Be critical. Think critically about what they're saying. But don't harass them. All right, love you guys.